Russell's Paradox. Imagine a library that keeps a special catalog. This catalog doesn't list every book, just the ones that don't list themselves. So any book that contains a list of books but doesn't include itself is added to this catalog. Now here's the twist. Should this catalog include itself? Think about it. If the catalog includes itself, then it lists itself, which breaks the rule that it only includes books that don't list themselves. But if it doesn't include itself, then it fits the criteria. It doesn't list itself, so it should be included. Either way, we land in contradiction. If it's in, it must be out. If it's out, it must be in. This is the essence of Russell's paradox. If you enjoyed this little journey into the curious world of logic and paradox, I'd love for you to take a moment to like this episode. It helps more curious minds find it too. And hey, drop a comment below and let me know what time it is where you're listening. I always find it comforting to see how this little corner of thought connects people from all over the world, across time zones. And if you're into strange ideas, deep questions, or just love the sound of a slow unraveling mystery, go ahead and subscribe. There's so much more to explore together. Now, let's shift the example from books to sets. A set is simply a collection, like the set of all cats, or the set of all books in a library. Some sets are straightforward, like the set of all even numbers. But in early mathematics, people started thinking bigger. What if we had a set that contains other sets? And then they asked, what about the set of all sets that do not contain themselves? It sounds like a fair question. Many sets clearly don't contain themselves. The set of all apples, for example, isn't an apple. It doesn't include itself. But some sets could. A set of all abstract concepts might possibly include itself as one of those concepts. So let's imagine a set we'll call R, the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Now comes the problem. Does R contain itself? Let's suppose it does. That means R is a set that doesn't contain itself, because that's the rule for what goes into R. But if it contains itself, it breaks the rule. So it must not contain itself. All right, let's suppose it doesn't contain itself. Well, that would make it a set that doesn't contain itself, which is exactly the kind of set R is supposed to include. So then it must contain itself. And just like that, we're caught in a contradiction. Whether we say R is in R or not in R, we're wrong either way. This paradox shook the very core of mathematics at the time. And it wasn't just a random brain teaser. It was discovered in 1901 by a British philosopher and magician named Bertrand Russell. At the time, he was studying the foundations of mathematics and set theory, and he was deeply influenced by the work of German magician Gottlob Frege. Frege had created a system meant to define all of mathematics using logic alone. But when Russell came across this paradox, he realized that Frege's system allowed the creation of sets like R, the set of all sets that do not contain themselves, which led directly to contradiction. Russell wrote to Frege and pointed this out. Frege, who had spent decades working on his system, was devastated. He admitted that Russell's discovery undermined the foundations of his work. From that moment on, mathematicians and philosophers realized they needed to rebuild the foundations of logic with stricter rules to avoid such paradoxes. One solution was to simply ban self-containing sets. This led to new systems like Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory, which laid out rules to prevent paradoxical constructions like the set R. Another solution came from Russell himself. He proposed a system called the theory of types, where sets are organized into levels, or types, and a set can only contain things from a lower level, not from its own or higher ones. This made it logically impossible for a set to contain itself. But Russell's paradox isn't just a mathematical hiccup. It revealed something fundamental about self-reference and how it can cause systems to collapse. You see this problem pop up in other places too. In language, there's the liar paradox. This sentence is false. If it's true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. It's the same kind of logical loop. Even in computer science, we deal with this when we use recursive functions, or when systems try to define or evaluate themselves. If you're not careful, these systems can break down just like the set R. Russell's paradox is a powerful reminder that some questions, no matter how simple they seem, can reveal deep cracks in the structures we take for granted. It teaches us to be cautious when reasoning about the infinite, about definitions, and especially about anything that refers back to itself. So the next time you hear someone say, "This rule applies to all rules," or you read a statement that tries to include itself in its own description, pause. Ask yourself if we might be stepping into the same kind of trap that Russell discovered over a century ago. Because sometimes the simplest question, like whether a catalog should include itself, can open the door to one of the biggest mysteries in logic. Zeno's paradoxes. Let's take a journey back over 2,000 years to ancient Greece. There, a philosopher named Zeno of Elea posed a series of puzzles that still baffle and fascinate thinkers today. These puzzles, called Zeno's paradoxes, are not just old riddles. They challenge our basic understanding of motion, time, and space. They seem simple at first, but the more you think about them, the stranger they become. Zeno lived around 500 BCE and was a student of the philosopher Parmenides. Parmenides believed that all change and motion were illusions, that nothing ever truly changes and everything is one unchanging reality. To defend this idea, Zeno created several paradoxes to show that motion is not only mysterious, it might be logically impossible. Let's explore a few of these paradoxes, starting with the most famous, Achilles and the tortoise. Let's imagine a race. Between two different competitors, the mighty Greek hero Achilles, fast, strong, and swift, and a slow, plodding tortoise. It's not much of a contest, right? Achilles would surely leave the tortoise in the dust within seconds. But Zeno, a philosopher from ancient Greece, posed a clever puzzle that challenges this common sense. He suggested that if the tortoise is given a head start, Achilles might never be able to catch him at all. Here's how the paradox works. Suppose Achilles gives the tortoise a 100-meter head start. Zeno says that before Achilles can overtake the tortoise, he first has to reach the spot where the tortoise started. But by the time Achilles gets there, the tortoise has moved a little farther ahead. Now Achilles has to run to that new spot. But again, by the time he gets there, the tortoise has moved a bit more. This keeps happening. Every time Achilles reaches where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved somewhere else. So the argument goes, Achilles will always be behind. No matter how fast he runs, he will always be chasing an ever-moving target. This process continues infinitely, an endless series of smaller and smaller distances that Achilles must first cover before catching up. Of course, in real life, we know Achilles would pass the tortoise in no time. We've all seen races. The faster runner wins, and the slower one falls behind. But Zeno isn't denying that movement exists. He's pointing out a logical contradiction in how we think about it. If there are an infinite number of steps Achilles must complete, can he ever actually finish them all? This is the heart of the paradox. Zeno is challenging how we understand motion and infinity. He's not talking about muscles and speed. He's talking about what it really means to move through space and time. So what's the answer? Was Zeno right? Today, we know more than Zeno did. Thanks to modern mathematics, especially calculus, we have a better way of dealing with infinity. Mathematicians now understand that even an infinite number of small steps can add up to a finite result. Let's look at the numbers. Achilles covers half the distance to the tortoise, then half the remaining distance, then half of that, and so on. This creates what's called a converging series. It turns out that if you keep halving the distance, the total distance still adds up to something finite. That means Achilles really does catch the tortoise, and he does it in a finite amount of time. So Zeno wasn't right in the literal sense, but his paradox still matters. It forced people to think deeply about space, time, and infinity. It showed that our everyday experiences don't always match our logical explanations, and it sparked debates that eventually helped shape modern science and math. In short, Zeno gave us more than a puzzle. He gave us a doorway into deep thinking. The Dichotomy Paradox. Now let's turn to another of Zeno's most intriguing puzzles. This one is called the Dichotomy Paradox. The word dichotomy simply means a division into two parts, and that's exactly what this paradox is about, dividing things in half, over and over again. Here's the setup. Zeno asks us to imagine a very simple task, walking from one side of a room to the other. Let's say the room is 10 meters wide. Seems easy enough, right? But Zeno says, before you can reach the other side, you have to get halfway there. So first you walk 5 meters. But before you can walk that 5 meters, you have to get halfway to that point too. So you must go 5 meters first. And before that you must go half of that, which is 1.25 meters. Then half again, 0.625 meters. Then 325 meters, and on and on. Every distance, no matter how small, must be crossed. And at each step there's still a smaller distance to cover first. The closer you get to your goal, the more tiny steps remain. Zeno's conclusion? Motion is impossible. He says that to go anywhere, you'd have to complete an infinite number of smaller and smaller steps. And since you can't finish an infinite number of tasks, you'd never actually arrive at your destination. According to the logic of the paradox, movement should be impossible, because there's always one more step to take. Now again, we know this doesn't match reality. We move around all the time. We walk across rooms, run across fields, and drive across cities. So what is Zeno really saying? What Zeno is doing here is not denying movement, but challenging the idea of movement when we think of space and time as being infinitely divisible. If every distance can be halved and there's always more halving to do, then you never quite finish. You're always partway there. So how do we resolve this? The solution came centuries later with the development of calculus, especially in the 17th century through the work of mathematicians like Isaac Newton and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. They introduced the idea that an infinite number of diminishing values can still add up to a finite whole. Let's return to our 10-meter walk. Yes, the distance can be divided infinitely, 5 meters, 2, 5, 2, 5, and so on. But when you add up all those numbers, 1/2 plus 1/4 plus 1/8 plus 1/16 and so forth, they approach a total. In fact, they converge to exactly 1, or in our case, the full 10 meters. So even though there are infinitely many steps, the total distance and time are finite. Zeno's paradox doesn't prove that motion is impossible, but it does reveal how strange and unintuitive infinity can be. It shows how math and philosophy sometimes collide and force us to re-examine what we think we know. So the next time you walk across a room, just remember you're solving a 2,500-year-old mystery with every step you take. The arrow paradox. Let's explore another one of Zeno's famous thought experiments. This one is called the arrow paradox. If the other paradoxes made you question space and motion, this one goes even deeper. It makes us question the very idea of time itself. Here's the setup. Imagine an arrow flying through the air. At any given moment, at any single point in time, Zeno asks you to picture what the arrow is doing. He says, freeze that moment. Don't let time move forward or backward. Just hold that instant still, like a single frame in a movie. What is the arrow doing in that exact moment? Zeno says, in that instant the arrow isn't moving. It's just sitting there, occupying a fixed position in space. Because time isn't passing, there's no change in its position, no distance traveled, no velocity, no motion. It's as if the arrow is frozen in place. Now Zeno says, if we take all the individual instants of time, like a series of frozen frames, then at every single instant, the arrow is motionless. So if the arrow is not moving at any instant, how can we say that it moves at all? How can something be made of still moments and somehow be moving? It's a strange way to think about motion, but it's also deeply thought-provoking. Zeno is challenging the idea that time is made up of indivisible moments, tiny motionless nows, and asking whether adding up an infinite number of stillnesses can ever produce motion. Let's take a step back. When we watch a movie, we're really watching thousands of still images played quickly, one after the other. Each frame is frozen, but together they create the illusion of motion. Zeno's paradox says, if reality works the same way with time made of still frames, then motion is an illusion. Just like the arrow in each frozen moment, everything is at rest. But we know the arrow moves, right? We've all seen arrows fly, or at least we've seen things move in real life. So again, what's going on? The resolution to the paradox comes from understanding that motion doesn't depend on looking at a single moment. It depends on change over time. In physics and modern calculus, we define motion using something called instantaneous velocity, a concept that tells us how quickly something is changing position at an exact instant. Even though the arrow's position might look fixed in a single moment, its velocity at that moment tells us it is moving. Think of it this way. Motion isn't just where the arrow is, it's how its position is changing across time, even at the smallest scales. So what Zeno revealed is that our understanding of time and motion isn't as straightforward as we think. His paradox forced philosophers and scientists to refine the definitions of change, time, and continuity. And that's the beauty of it. The arrow paradox doesn't stop motion. It sharpens our understanding of what motion really means. In a way, Zeno's paradoxes were ahead of their time. They pointed out deep questions about infinity, time, and motion that would take centuries to address mathematically. And while we now have tools to answer many of Zeno's challenges, the paradoxes still remind us of how tricky our intuition can be when it comes to the infinite or the very small. But Zeno also gave us something more than puzzles. He gave us a way to think critically about what we take for granted. Just because something seems obvious, like motion being possible, doesn't mean it's easy to explain. Zeno's paradoxes invite us to slow down and really examine the foundations of how we understand the world. So, the next time you take a walk or a run across the street, you'll know that you've just solved an ancient philosophical riddle by moving. The liar paradox. Imagine someone walks up to you, looks you in the eye and says, "I am lying." Simple, right? Just 3 words. But suddenly your brain starts doing loops. If that person is lying, then what they're saying must be false. But wait, they just said they're lying. So if that statement is false, they're actually not lying, which means they're telling the truth, which means they are lying. And around it goes. Welcome to the strange, puzzling world of the liar paradox. This paradox goes back at least 2,500 years to ancient Greece. One of the earliest versions comes from a philosopher named Epimenides, a Cretan, who reportedly said, "All Cretans are liars." If a Cretan says all Cretans are liars, then is he lying? If he is, then at least some Cretans must be truthful. But if that's the case, then his claim that all Cretans are liars is false. And if it's false, maybe he is telling the truth? It quickly becomes a loop with no clear way out. The most distilled and famous version of this puzzle is the sentence, "This sentence is false." Now take a moment and try to analyze that sentence as if you were a computer or a logician. What is it saying? It's talking about itself. It's self-referential. It claims that the sentence you're reading, is false. Let's say it's true. If the sentence is true, then what it says must be the case. But it says it's false, so if it's true, it must be false. Now let's flip it. Suppose the sentence is false. If what it says isn't the case and it says it's false, then it must actually be true. You end up with a contradiction either way. If the sentence is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. It undermines itself no matter what. It's like trying to stand on a step that vanishes the moment you put weight on it. So what's going on here? This little sentence, so short and innocent looking, isn't just playing games. It cuts right into the heart of some of the biggest questions in philosophy, language, logic, and even mathematics. At its core, the liar paradox challenges how we understand truth. Normally, we assume every statement is either true or false. This is called the law of the excluded middle. A statement can't be both and it can't be neither. But the liar sentence seems to be both and neither, all at once. It also exposes the problems with self-reference. Most everyday statements are about other things, like the sky is blue or water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. But the liar sentence refers to itself. And that's where things start to get weird. It's like pointing a camera at a screen that shows the camera's output, a feedback loop that gets increasingly distorted. This paradox is not just a fun brain teaser. It caused serious trouble for logicians and mathematicians in the 20th century. The famous philosopher and mathematician Bertrand Russell encountered a similar puzzle when trying to formalize all of mathematics into a complete logical system. He found that allowing self-referential definitions, like the set of all sets that do not contain themselves, led to contradictions. This became known as Russell's paradox and shook the foundations of set theory. Then came Kurt Gödel, a brilliant Austrian logician, who used a similar idea to deliver a revolutionary blow to mathematics. In the 1930s, he proved that any system complex enough to describe basic arithmetic would contain true statements that cannot be proven within the system. His incompleteness theorems show that no matter how airtight your logic is, there will always be truths that escape its grasp, and his proof was based in part on a kind of self-referential statement, like the liar paradox. So what do we do with a sentence like, "This sentence is false"? Can we fix it? Some magicians have tried. One approach is to create hierarchies of language, saying that a sentence can't refer to itself, but only to sentences at a lower level. This is like saying a judge can't rule on whether they themselves are guilty. They need another level of authority. In this system, the liar sentence is just not allowed because it breaks the rules of the hierarchy. Other approaches are more radical. Some philosophers have proposed rejecting the idea that every statement must be either true or false. Maybe there are sentences that are neither, or even both, truth values that go beyond simple binaries. These ideas lead to non-classical logics and even para-consistent logics, where contradictions are allowed to exist without collapsing the whole system. And in computer science, dealing with self-reference is crucial. In programming, if a function calls itself without a clear stopping point, it causes an error called infinite recursion, a kind of computational paradox. Understanding how to manage self-reference has shaped how we design systems that can reason and talk about themselves, like artificial intelligence. In the end, the liar paradox doesn't destroy truth, but it forces us to think more carefully about how we define and use it. It teaches us that language isn't always safe or straightforward. Sometimes the way we phrase a sentence can push the limits of logic itself. So next time someone says, "I'm lying," don't just laugh. Realize that hidden in that simple statement is a centuries-old puzzle, one that still challenges how we think about truth, meaning, and even reality. The Omnipotence Paradox. Imagine a being that can do absolutely anything. It can create worlds from nothing, stop time, move mountains with a thought. It has no limits, no flaws, no weaknesses. It is, by every definition, all-powerful. In religious and philosophical traditions, this being is often called God, or simply described as omnipotent. But then someone asks a question. Just one question. And suddenly everything gets complicated. Can an all-powerful being create a stone so heavy that even it cannot lift it? Think about that for a moment. If the being can create such a stone, then there's something it can't do. It can't lift it. But if it can't create the stone, then again there's something it can't do. It can't create it. Either way, there's something this all-powerful being cannot do. And that's the heart of the Omnipotence Paradox. This paradox challenges the very idea of unlimited power. On the surface, it seems like a playful riddle, but underneath, it raises serious questions about logic, power, and the nature of divine perfection. It asks, what does it really mean to be all-powerful? Let's explore this step by step. The key problem is that the paradox turns power against itself. It sets up a scenario where no matter what the being does, it ends up with a limitation. Either it fails to create the stone, or it fails to lift it. And if it fails to do anything, then it seems it's not truly omnipotent. So how have philosophers tried to answer this? One common approach is to say, the question doesn't make sense. It's like asking, can a square be round? Or can 2 + 2 = 5? It's not that the being lacks power. It's that the request itself is logically incoherent. Creating a stone that an all-powerful being can't lift is a contradiction. It's asking for a situation where the being is both all-powerful and not all-powerful at the same time. In other words, the problem isn't with the being. It's with the question. This leads to a refined definition of omnipotence. An omnipotent being can do anything that is logically possible. It can create a universe, end suffering, change the laws of physics, but it cannot do what is logically nonsensical. This approach goes back to philosophers like Thomas Aquinas, a medieval thinker who argued that God's power doesn't include the power to contradict logic itself. God, he said, cannot make contradictions true. Not because of weakness, but because contradictions are not things at all. They are nothings. They're like asking for a married bachelor or a one-ended stick. But not everyone is satisfied with this answer. Some argue that if we start limiting what omnipotence can do, even to only what's logically possible, aren't we already reducing the idea of omnipotence? Doesn't all-powerful mean everything, not just the parts that make sense to human minds? Others take a different route entirely. They argue that omnipotence should be understood within context, that it means the being can do anything that's consistent with its own nature. So if God is also perfectly rational or perfectly good, then it makes sense that God can't do irrational or evil things, not because of a lack of power, but because those things would violate God's own identity. Still others see the paradox as revealing a deeper truth, that language has limits. Just because we can form a sentence doesn't mean that sentence points to a meaningful idea. Can an unstoppable force meet an immovable object? Is another classic version of this kind of puzzle. It sounds deep, but it depends on concepts that cancel each other out. If something is truly unstoppable, then nothing can be immovable. And if something is truly immovable, then nothing can be unstoppable. The two ideas can't exist in the same universe without contradicting each other. So where does that leave us? The Omnipotence Paradox isn't really about lifting rocks, it's about how we think. It shows that even our most powerful ideas, like the idea of absolute power, can be twisted into confusion if we're not careful with language and logic. It also reminds us of a humbling truth, that some questions don't have clean, easy answers. Not because the answers are hidden from us, but because the questions themselves bend the rules of thought. And sometimes, that's what paradoxes are for, not to give answers but to stretch our understanding. So, can an all-powerful being create a stone so heavy it can't lift it? Maybe the better question is, what are we really asking when we ask that? We might be asking whether limits can exist within limitlessness, or whether our definitions need updating. We might be asking whether human logic can fully contain divine power, or whether in the end, some mysteries remain mysteries. One thing is clear, when we ask questions like this, we're not just playing with words, we're brushing up against the edges of meaning itself. Moral luck. Imagine two drivers leaving a party late at night. Both have had too much to drink. Both know they shouldn't be driving, but they do anyway. They take different routes home. One makes it without incident. The other, driving under the same conditions, hits a pedestrian who suddenly steps into the road. The pedestrian dies. Now pause. Ask yourself, are these two drivers equally blameworthy? Most people would say no. We instinctively treat the second driver, the one who killed someone, as morally worse. Society punishes them more harshly, we feel more outraged, and they may even carry more guilt. But here's the troubling part. Both drivers made the same decision, with the same level of recklessness. The only difference was something outside their control. Luck. This is the puzzle of moral luck. The term moral luck was popularized by the philosopher Thomas Nagel in the late 20th century, though the idea traces back centuries. It refers to situations where we hold people morally responsible for things that depend, at least in part, on luck, on outcomes they couldn't fully control. At first glance, this seems unfair. We usually think that people should be judged based on their intentions, their choices, and what's within their control. You shouldn't be blamed or praised for things that happen purely by chance, right? But in real life, that's not how we always behave. Let's return to the drunk drivers. The one who killed someone is often charged with vehicular manslaughter or negligent homicide, while the other may only get a DUI charge. One might go to prison, the other might lose their license. Yet both made the same decision. The only difference is luck, the tragic timing of someone stepping into the road. This gap between intention and outcome reveals something unsettling. Our moral judgments are deeply tied to consequences, even when those consequences are random. Now, moral luck doesn't just apply to criminal cases. It touches nearly every part of life. Think of a soldier who makes a risky decision in battle. If it works out, they might be celebrated as a hero. If it goes badly, even with the same reasoning, they could be blamed for lives lost. Or consider two business leaders who both make a bold investment. One hits a market upswing and becomes a genius. The other, facing a recession, is blamed for recklessness. Same choice, different outcomes, different moral judgments. Philosophers have identified different types of moral luck. Resultant luck. This is about consequences. Like in the drunk driving case, the outcome, whether someone died, affects how we judge the person. Circumstantial luck. This concerns the situations people find themselves in. For example, imagine someone raised in a peaceful country who never has to make a morally difficult choice. versus someone who grows up in a war zone and faces life or death decisions daily. The second person's morality is tested more severely, not because of who they are, but because of the situation fate handed them. Constitutive luck. This is about who you are, your personality, temperament, even your impulses. We didn't choose our genes or early environments, yet they shape how kind, selfish, or courageous we might be. How fair is it to morally judge someone for traits they never chose? Causal luck. This goes even deeper, questioning whether we are free at all. If every action is part of a chain of causes stretching back before we were born, how can we ever be truly responsible? These categories show that luck infects every level of moral evaluation. The more we think about it, the harder it becomes to draw clean lines between choice and chance, blame and fate. So where does that leave us? Some philosophers bite the bullet and say, yes, moral luck is real and moral judgment is inherently unfair. That's just the human condition. Others try to resist it, arguing that we should only judge people based on intentions and choices, not outcomes. But this approach runs into a problem. In real life, we don't operate that way. We care about what happens, not just what was meant. There's also a middle path. Some argue that we can distinguish legal consequences from moral ones. Legally, outcomes might matter, because laws protect real lives and real victims. But morally, perhaps we should focus more on the agent's decision, not the accident of what followed. Moral luck forces us to ask hard questions. How much control do we really have? How much blame or credit do we deserve? And how should we respond when misfortune strikes? Not because of malice or carelessness, but because of bad luck. In the end, moral luck doesn't give us easy answers, but it makes us more thoughtful, more cautious, more compassionate. It reminds us that people are often doing the best they can in circumstances they didn't choose. And sometimes judging fairly means recognizing the hidden role that chance plays in every life, including our own. Grandfather Paradox. Imagine you've just built a time machine. Not a metaphorical one, a real machine, one that can take you to the past. You set the date, press a button, and in a flash, you're standing in the world of your grandparents. The year is 1950. Everything smells like motor oil and cigarettes. Men wear hats. Cars have fins. Now imagine you find your grandfather before he ever met your grandmother. He's a young man, maybe your age. You follow him, you talk to him. And here comes the twist. You decide to kill him. It sounds horrible, but this is a thought experiment, after all. You go through with it. Your grandfather dies. And now here comes the question that creates the paradox. If your grandfather died before he ever met your grandmother, then one of your parents was never born. And if your parent was never born, then you were never born. But if you were never born, then you couldn't have gone back in time in the first place. Which means you never killed your grandfather. Which means he lived. Which means your parent was born. Which means you were born. Which means you could go back in time and kill him. And around we go. That's the grandfather paradox. At its heart, the paradox exposes a contradiction in our idea of time travel. We imagine that time is like a road. You can move forward or backward. But once you allow backward travel, you create the possibility of changing the past in ways that undo the future, including undoing yourself. It's not just about killing grandfathers. It could be anything. Stopping a war, saving a historical figure, preventing your own birth by accident. The problem is always the same. If you change something that affects your own existence, then you undermine the very action that allowed you to make that change. It's a loop, a contradiction of cause and effect, and it violates one of the basic principles of logic, that something cannot both be and not be at the same time. You can't both exist and not exist. Yet the grandfather paradox suggests that, under time travel, you might. So what do scientists and philosophers do with this? There are a few approaches. Let's explore the most common ones. 1. Time travel is impossible. Some thinkers take the paradox as proof that time travel to the past is logically impossible. The reasoning is simple. If backward time travel creates contradictions, then it can't happen, period. This is a position held by many physicists and philosophers who believe the universe must be logically consistent, but others aren't ready to give up so easily. 2. The timeline is fixed. Another idea is that the timeline is unchangeable. This means even if you go back in time, you can't change anything, because whatever you do was already part of history. In this version, maybe you try to kill your grandfather, but something always stops you. The gun jams, he dodges the bullet, or you just can't go through with it. Fate or physics or some deeper law of time prevents paradoxes by making sure history stays exactly the way it was. This is sometimes called the Novikov self-consistency principle. According to it, events in the past are locked in. You can go back, but everything you do must be consistent with the history that already happened. The 3. Multiple timelines or parallel universes. Then there's a more science fiction-flavored solution, the multiverse. In this view, when you go back in time and kill your grandfather, you don't erase yourself from existence. Instead, you create or jump to a parallel universe. In this new timeline, your grandfather dies early and you're never born there, but you still exist because you came from a different timeline where he lived. This is popular in movies and TV shows. Think Avengers Endgame, Back to the Future, or Rick and Morty. Each timeline becomes its own branch of reality. You can mess with one without destroying the others. This solves the paradox, but at the cost of introducing many, possibly infinite, realities. Number 4. The block universe theory. Another approach comes from physics and is called the block universe view. According to this model, past, present, and future are all equally real, like frames in a film reel. Time doesn't flow, it just is. From this perspective, what will happen has already happened. In this kind of universe, the paradox might never arise because free will doesn't exist in the way we think it does. You can't change the past because the past, present, and future are already fixed. It's a strange idea, but one taken seriously by some physicists in the field of relativity and quantum mechanics. So what makes the grandfather paradox so enduring? It isn't just about time machines or science fiction. It's about the fragile relationship between cause and effect, between freedom and fate, and between what we do and what it means. It asks whether time is something we move through, or something that moves through us. And it leaves us with unsettling questions. If the past can be changed, can the future be trusted? If our actions ripple through time, do we ever really choose freely? And if changing one moment undoes everything, can we ever truly understand the consequences of what we do? Maybe in the end, that's why the grandfather paradox keeps us thinking. Not because we all plan to build a time machine, but because it reminds us that even when we don't, we are all shaped by the past and shaping the future with every step we take. Euthyphro Dilemma. A young man named Euthyphro is there looking unusually confident. He's come to press charges against his own father. You ask why. Euthyphro explains his father accidentally caused the death of a servant and justice must be done. He's doing the morally right thing, he insists, because it's what the gods command. Just then, a familiar figure steps forward. It's Socrates, the philosopher. Curious as ever, he starts asking questions. What follows is one of the most famous conversations in the history of philosophy. It's recorded by Plato, and at its center is a question that has puzzled believers, skeptics, and moral thinkers for over 2,000 years. It's called the Euthyphro Dilemma. Here's the question Socrates asks. Is something good because the gods command it? Or do the gods command it because it is good? It sounds simple, but this question opens a deep and difficult paradox. Let's explore both sides of it. Option 1. Something is good because God or the gods commands it. This view is known as divine command theory. It says that moral right and wrong are defined by the will of God. If God says something is good, like helping the poor or telling the truth, then it is good, simply because God said so. At first, this sounds fine. If you believe in an all-knowing, all-good deity, it makes sense to follow their guidance. But Socrates sees a problem. If morality is based only on God's command, then right and wrong seem arbitrary. God could declare anything good, even torture or cruelty, and it would be good, simply because God said so. That feels wrong. It suggests that goodness is just a matter of divine opinion, not something real or meaningful on its own. It also creates a strange idea of God as a kind of moral dictator. If God could have just as easily said, murder is noble, what does it mean to call God good? Wouldn't that just mean God obeys God's own rules? So now we turn to the second option. Option 2. God commands something because it is good. Here, morality exists independently of God. Things like kindness or justice are good on their own, and God recognizes their goodness, like a wise teacher pointing out what's true. This feels more satisfying. It means that good and evil are not arbitrary. They're real features of the universe, and even God responds to them. But now you face a different problem. If goodness exists outside of God, then God is no longer the source of morality. That challenges the idea that God is the foundation of all that is good. It suggests there's a standard higher than God, some eternal law or truth that even God must follow. For religious believers, this can be uncomfortable. If God isn't the source of goodness, is he still all-powerful? And if we can recognize goodness without God, then what role does religion play in morality at all? And that's the Euthyphro Dilemma. Both answers seem to weaken something important. If good is based purely on God's command, morality seems arbitrary. If good exists apart from God, then God is not the ultimate source of right and wrong. It's a true philosophical dilemma. Whichever way you choose, you're left with consequences. So how do people respond? Some philosophers accept the second option and say that morality is independent of religion. Atheists and secular ethicists often take this view. They argue that reason, empathy, and social understanding give us a basis for ethics without needing a divine source. Others, especially religious thinkers, offer more complex answers. One popular response is to say that God's nature is identical with goodness itself. In this view, God doesn't invent morality or just follow it. God is the standard of goodness. His commands aren't arbitrary, but they're not outside of him either. This is sometimes called the modified divine command theory. It tries to escape the dilemma by redefining the relationship. God's will and the moral good are not separate, but unified in God's essence. But not everyone finds this satisfying. It raises new questions. What does it mean to say that God is goodness? Can we understand that idea without it becoming circular? And if we still need to interpret God's nature, don't we end up appealing to some independent standard after all? What makes the Euthyphro Dilemma so powerful is that it challenges how we ground our deepest moral beliefs. If you're religious, it asks, do you obey because something is good or because God says so? If you're secular, it asks, where do your ideas of good and evil come from, and are they as objective as you think? It also raises practical questions. Should we follow rules without questioning them? Is it more moral to obey or to understand? Like many great paradoxes, the Euthyphro Dilemma doesn't offer easy answers. Instead, it opens a space for serious reflection about the roots of ethics, the nature of authority, and what it means to live a good life. So the next time someone says it's wrong because God says so, or we don't need God to know what's right, you might pause and remember that Socratic voice in the back of your mind, asking gently but insistently, is it good because it's commanded, or commanded because it's good? The Fermi Paradox. Imagine you're standing outside on a warm summer night, looking up at the stars. Above you stretches the vastness of the universe. Millions of stars, billions of planets, and the quiet suggestion that somewhere out there life must exist. Not just microbes or algae, but intelligent beings, civilizations, aliens, advanced life forms with technology far beyond our own. Maybe they've been around for millions of years. Maybe they've spread across entire galaxies. So where are they? That question, where is everybody, is the heart of the Fermi Paradox. It's named after the physicist Enrico Fermi, who casually posed the question during lunch at Los Alamos National Laboratory in the 1950s. The paradox comes from a tension between two things: the high probability that intelligent life exists elsewhere in the universe, the complete lack of evidence that it does. Let's break that down. 1. The universe is big, really big. Astronomers estimate there are about 100 billion stars in our galaxy, the Milky Way. Many of those stars have planets, and a growing number of those planets appear to be Earth-like, with temperatures, atmospheres, and conditions that could support life. And that's just our galaxy. There are estimated to be 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. If even a tiny fraction of planets develop life, and if even a small percentage of that life becomes intelligent, then the universe should be teeming with civilizations, some of them far older and more advanced than we are. Given enough time and spacefaring technology, it seems likely that at least some of them would have spread out, colonized other planets, maybe even entire galaxies. So again, where is everybody? 2. The paradox. The paradox is simple to state. If intelligent alien life is common, we should have seen some sign of it by now. Radio signals, probes, artifacts, even visits. But we haven't, not a whisper. The universe seems silent, and so far, we appear to be completely alone. And that doesn't add up. Because our planet isn't that special. We're relatively young, cosmically speaking. If alien civilizations got a head start by just a few million years, they could be far more advanced than us. They could have built galaxy-spanning empires, sent machines to explore every star system, or developed ways to signal across unimaginable distances. But there's no trace, no message, no structure, no evidence. Just silence. That's the Fermi Paradox. 3. So what are the possible explanations? Over the years, scientists and philosophers have proposed dozens of answers. None are proven, but all are fascinating. Let's look at a few of the big ones. 1. We're early. Maybe intelligent life is rare and slow to evolve. We might be among the first civilizations to reach this level of technology. If the universe is a party, maybe we just showed up early and the other guests haven't arrived yet. 2. They're too far away. The universe is vast. Even light, the fastest thing we know, takes years to reach even the closest stars. Civilizations might exist, but be so far away that their signals haven't reached us, or ours haven't reached them. It's like being in a forest, shouting in the dark. You could be surrounded by others, but you wouldn't know it unless they shouted back at the exact right time and direction. 3. They're not using radio. We assume aliens would use radio waves like we do. But what if advanced civilizations use technologies we can't detect? Maybe they communicate through quantum entanglement, or with systems that are silent to us. It's possible we're like ants trying to understand a cell phone, completely blind to what's really going on. 4. They don't want to talk. Maybe they know we're here, but they're choosing to stay silent. This is known as the zoo hypothesis, the idea that Earth is like a nature preserve or a science experiment. Advanced civilizations might be observing us, but not interfering, much like we try not to disturb animals in the wild. 5. They destroy themselves. A darker possibility: intelligent life is self-destructive. Maybe once civilizations reach a certain level of technology, they inevitably wipe themselves out, through war, climate collapse, or artificial intelligence gone wrong. This theory suggests that the silence in the universe is actually the sound of extinction. Civilizations don't last long enough to spread out or make contact. This leads us to a chilling question. Is this our future too? 6. There's nothing out there. And finally, the most unsettling answer of all: we're alone. Life might be unbelievably rare. Maybe the conditions that led to life on Earth are a cosmic fluke, a 1 in a trillion accident that hasn't happened anywhere else. If that's true, then we might be the only voice in a silent universe. So, why does it matter? The Fermi Paradox isn't just about aliens, it's about ourselves. It forces us to ask, are we really unique? How long can civilizations survive? What does it take to send a message across the stars? And if we are alone, what responsibility do we have as the only known intelligent life in the universe? It's a paradox that turns astronomy into existential reflection. It reminds us that while we stare up at the stars asking, where is everybody? The universe might be asking us the same thing. Imagine a cat. Not just any cat. This cat is sitting inside a sealed steel box. You can't see inside, you can't hear anything. The box is perfectly closed. But there's something strange about this box. Something that makes it one of the most famous and weirdest thought experiments in the history of science. This is Schrodinger's cat, a mind-bending paradox created by the Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger in 1935. And while it might sound like science fiction or a joke, it was actually designed to highlight a real, unsettling problem at the heart of quantum mechanics, the branch of physics that deals with particles smaller than atoms. Let's open the box, step by step. The setup: inside this imaginary box there's a cat. Alongside it is a tiny bit of radioactive material, just a single atom. There's also a Geiger counter to detect whether the atom decays, and a vial of poison gas connected to a mechanism. If the Geiger counter detects radioactive decay, the mechanism breaks the vial, and the poison is released. The cat dies. But if the atom doesn't decay, the poison stays sealed, and the cat lives. Now here's where it gets weird. According to the rules of quantum mechanics, subatomic particles like atoms don't behave in predictable, fixed ways. Instead, they exist in a strange state called superposition, where they can be in multiple states at once until they are observed or measured. In the case of our atom, this means it's both decayed and not decayed at the same time. And since the cat's life depends on that atom, the cat becomes tied to that uncertainty. So until someone opens the box and checks, the cat is not simply alive or dead. In a very real, very disturbing way, the cat is both alive and dead at the same time. Wait, what? According to the math of quantum mechanics, if you treat the whole system, the atom, the poison, and the cat, as one big quantum object, then the system exists in a superposition of two possible realities. One, where the atom decayed, the poison was released, and the cat is dead. Another, where the atom did not decay, the poison stayed sealed, and the cat is alive. And both of those realities exist simultaneously, until someone observes the system. When you open the box, the wave of uncertainty collapses into a single outcome: alive or dead. This sounds absurd, and that's exactly the point. Schrodinger came up with the cat to criticize the strange implications of quantum theory, not to endorse them. He was saying, if you really believe what the math says, then you have to believe in a cat that is both dead and alive. Does that really make sense? So what's the deeper problem? Schrodinger's cat is not about cats or poison. It's about the weirdness of quantum measurement. At the quantum level, particles don't behave like tiny billiard balls. They behave like waves of probability. You can't say exactly where an electron is or what state it's in until you measure it. This leads to a big question. When exactly does a quantum system stop being uncertain and become real? Is it when a machine records it? When a person looks at it? Or does reality stay blurry until consciousness enters the scene? Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that conscious observation is what collapses the wave function, meaning the act of looking actually creates reality. Others believe that the measurement device alone is enough to cause collapse, even without a person involved. There's even a more radical idea that the wave function never collapses at all. The many worlds theory. One of the most mind-blowing interpretations of Schrödinger's cat is called the many worlds interpretation. According to this idea, when the atom's fate becomes uncertain, decayed or not, the universe splits into two parallel worlds. In one, the atom decays, the poison is released, and the cat dies. In another, the atom doesn't decay, the poison stays sealed, and the cat lives. So instead of the cat being both dead and alive in one box, it's alive in one universe and dead in another, and both universes are real. You only experience one outcome, but the other version still exists, just in a branch of the universe you can't reach. This interpretation removes the need for wave collapse, but introduces something even stranger. An infinite number of realities, splitting off from every quantum event. Why it matters? Schrödinger's cat isn't just a quirky thought experiment. It cuts straight to the core of how we understand reality. It raises profound questions. Is reality objective, or does it depend on observation? Can two contradictory states exist at once? What does it mean to know something has happened? And it highlights the discomfort many scientists feel with the current theories. Quantum mechanics works incredibly well. It predicts experiments to astonishing precision, but what it means is still up for debate. Schrödinger's cat reminds us that at the most fundamental level, the universe is not what it seems. It's not fixed, not solid. It's uncertain, indeterminate, and deeply mysterious. So the next time you see a cat sleeping peacefully in a sunbeam, remember, in the quantum world that cat might be both purring and not purring, alive and not alive, until you check. And when you do, well then the universe makes up its mind. The twin paradox. Imagine two identical twins, let's call them Anna and Zoe. They're the same age, same DNA, same childhood memories. Everything about them is the same, until the day Anna climbs into a spaceship. This isn't just any space trip. Anna is going on a high-speed journey near the speed of light, deep into space. Zoe, meanwhile, stays on Earth. Now here's the question. When Anna returns home, who will be older? Your first instinct might say, they're twins. Time passed equally for both. They should be the same age. But Einstein's theory of relativity tells a very different and very strange story. When the ship lands and Anna steps out, she looks younger. Not just a little, maybe years younger. Zoe has aged far more than Anna has. Two people born on the same day are now in completely different stages of life. How is that possible? That's the mystery at the heart of the twin paradox. The science behind it. To understand the paradox, we have to go back to Albert Einstein's theory of special relativity, published in 1905. One of the core ideas in special relativity is this: time doesn't pass the same for everyone. Instead, how fast time moves for you depends on how fast you're moving, relative to someone else. This idea leads to a bizarre but very real phenomenon called time dilation. It means that if you travel near the speed of light, time for you slows down compared to someone who's standing still. So in our story, Anna, the twin traveling in the spaceship, is moving at an incredible speed. For her, time is literally ticking more slowly. Maybe she experiences only 2 years of travel, but back on Earth, Zoe might experience 10 years. That's not science fiction. That's physics. So why is it a paradox? At first glance, this seems contradictory. After all, relativity is relative, right? If Anna is moving fast relative to Zoe, then from Anna's perspective, Zoe is the one moving. Shouldn't Anna see Zoe aging more slowly? That's the twist. This seems to create a paradox. Each twin should see the other aging more slowly. And when they reunite, each expects to be younger. How can that possibly work? The resolution lies in the asymmetry of the situation. Yes, both twins can view the other as moving, but only Anna, the traveling twin, experiences acceleration. She has to turn her ship around at some point and return to Earth. That moment, when Anna changes direction, breaks the symmetry. Zoe stays in the same inertial frame. No acceleration, no change in direction. Anna doesn't. She leaves, speeds up, turns around, and comes back. That makes her experience of time fundamentally different. According to relativity, that's enough to cause the age gap. So the paradox isn't a contradiction after all. It only seems like one because our everyday intuition doesn't prepare us for how weird time becomes at high speeds. How big is the difference? Let's say Anna travels to a star 5 light-years away, at 90% the speed of light. For Zoe on Earth, the round trip might take over 11 years. But due to time dilation, Anna might experience only 5 years on her journey. When she comes back, Zoe is 11 years older, and Anna is only 5 years older. She's returned younger than her twin. Realistically, they could have left as teenagers and returned with one still looking 20 while the other is pushing 30. Is it real? Yes, this isn't just theory. We've measured time dilation. Astronauts who spend time in orbit traveling fast and experiencing less gravity age slightly less than people on Earth. The effect is tiny at those speeds, but it's measurable. In fact, our GPS satellites have to account for both special and general relativity. Without adjusting for time dilation, your phone's location would be wildly inaccurate. The twin paradox just pushes that idea to the extreme, traveling close to the speed of light, where the difference becomes dramatic. What it reveals. The twin paradox forces us to rethink how we understand time itself. We're used to thinking of time as a universal clock, ticking the same for everyone. But Einstein showed that time is personal. It flows differently for different people, depending on how they move through space. This also means that past, present, and future aren't absolute. They depend on your point of view. What's now for you may be later or earlier for someone else, if they're moving fast enough. The emotional side, beyond the physics, the paradox is haunting. Imagine coming home to a world that has moved on without you. Your twin is older. Friends have aged. Maybe decades have passed. You've only lived a few years, but the planet you left behind is no longer the same. It's like time travel to the future, but without a machine, just a very fast spaceship. The price? Everything you know might be gone when you return. Final thought. The twin paradox isn't really a contradiction. It's a window into the deeper nature of time. It shows that time is not fixed, not uniform, not universal. It bends and stretches depending on how you move. And while we may not be building ships that approach light speed anytime soon, the paradox reminds us that the universe is far stranger and more beautiful than it appears. The Bootstrap Paradox. Imagine you're a curious traveler fascinated by history and technology. One day you stumble upon a time machine. You decide to use it. Not to change the past, but to understand it. So you set the machine to the year 1800 and take with you something simple. a worn-out copy of Shakespeare's complete works. You arrive, find a quiet town, and leave the book in a library hidden among old manuscripts. Then you return to the present. Years later, a scholar discovers the old book. It's published again. It spreads across the world. Centuries pass. And eventually, that very same copy ends up in your hands. The same copy you will someday take back in time. Now pause. Here's the question. Who wrote the book? It wasn't Shakespeare. You brought it from the future. But in the future, you only had it because it existed in the past. There's no clear origin. The book exists, but it was never actually written by anyone in that timeline. It just looped. This is the Bootstrap Paradox. The Bootstrap Paradox is a time travel paradox where an object or piece of information is sent back in time and becomes the very cause of its own existence, with no clear point of origin. The term bootstrap comes from the old saying, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, doing something impossible like lifting yourself off the ground by tugging on your own shoes. In this paradox, the item or knowledge pulls itself into existence, apparently from nothing. It's also sometimes called a causal loop, or a self-creating loop. And once you see it, you start to wonder, how can something come from nothing? Doesn't that break every law of logic, physics, and common sense? Let's look at some examples. Example 1. The Time Traveler and Beethoven. Imagine someone travels back in time to meet Ludwig van Beethoven, only to find out he never composed any music at all. He died young or never took up the piano. Wanting to preserve history, the traveler writes down all of Beethoven's famous symphonies from memory and publishes them in Beethoven's name. These works become legendary, and centuries later, the traveler learns them growing up until one day he travels back and repeats the cycle. So again, who actually composed the music? Not Beethoven, not the traveler. The music exists in a loop, with no true creator. Example 2. The Scientist's Inspiration. A physicist receives a notebook in the mail filled with brilliant equations. She uses them to invent new technology, become famous, and eventually build a time machine. As an old woman, she travels back in time and gives the notebook to her younger self. The equations came from the notebook. But who wrote them? Why it's a paradox? The Bootstrap Paradox violates causality, the principle that every effect must have a cause. In normal situations, A causes B and B causes C. But in a bootstrap loop, A causes B, which causes A again. There's no clear starting point. The item or idea seems to exist without origin, stuck in an infinite time loop. And yet, nothing seems to break. The loop is consistent. There are no contradictions, no paradoxes like you killed your own grandfather. Everything checks out, except the feeling that something important is missing, a source. Where did it all come from? Can it really happen? In theory, yes, depending on your interpretation of time travel. Einstein's general theory of relativity allows for solutions called closed time-like curves, essentially loops in space-time where something could circle back and affect its own past. Physicists like Kip Thorne have explored these ideas. Mathematically, such loops don't necessarily break the laws of physics, but they challenge our philosophical understanding of reality. Many argue that a self-originating object violates the law of conservation. Matter or energy can't just appear without cause. Others suggest that if the loop is perfectly self-contained, it may not break any physical law. It's just deeply weird. The Bootstrap Paradox doesn't just mess with time travel. It challenges the very idea of creation, origin, and meaning. Can information exist without a creator? Can knowledge be passed down forever without ever being invented? Is there such a thing as true authorship in a loop? It forces us to confront how we define existence. In a universe where time can loop, the origin of things becomes blurry. What we take for granted, cause and effect, progress and invention, might be an illusion created by circular logic. The paradox is a favorite in science fiction. In Doctor Who, the Doctor explains the Bootstrap Paradox using Beethoven's music. In Predestination 2014, a time travel thriller, the main character is caught in a complex bootstrap identity loop. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry casts a spell to save himself, because he remembers being saved by it earlier. The knowledge comes from the loop itself. These stories don't just entertain, they reflect our growing curiosity and discomfort with nonlinear time. The Bootstrap Paradox is more than a puzzle, it's a philosophical mirror. It shows us how fragile our sense of reality can be when time is no longer a straight line. It asks us to question the source of our ideas, our creations, even ourselves. And maybe that's the most haunting part. If something can exist without ever being made, what else might exist right now, looping silently through time, without origin or end? Simpsons Paradox. Imagine you're choosing a doctor for surgery. You look at the success rates. Dr. A has a higher success rate overall than Dr. B. Seems like a clear choice, right? But then you look closer at the success rates broken down by patient condition. And now the story changes. In every single category, Dr. B is better. Better with minor surgeries, better with complicated cases, better across the board. And yet somehow Dr. A still looks better overall. How is that possible? That strange twist is at the heart of Simpsons Paradox, a phenomenon where trends appear in separate groups of data, but reverse when the groups are combined. It's not a trick. It's not bad math. It's just how statistics sometimes work in the real world. And it can lead to wildly misleading conclusions if you don't know what to look for. Simpsons Paradox shows that when we combine data from different groups, the overall trend can reverse, even if each group shows the opposite pattern. In other words, a treatment can look harmful overall, even if it helps in every subgroup. Or, a company might look like it discriminates against no one, until you look at individual departments. It's counterintuitive. It feels wrong, but it's mathematically correct. The paradox is named after the British statistician Edward H. Simpson, who described it in the 1950s. But the basic idea has appeared in research, politics, medicine, and decision-making for decades, even centuries, under various names. Let's look at a classic example. Imagine two treatments for kidney stones, treatment A and treatment B. Here's the data. For small stones, treatment A has a success rate of 93%, treatment B has a success rate of 87%. For large stones, treatment A has a success rate of 73%. Treatment B has a success rate of 69%. So in both categories, small and large stones, treatment A performs better. But now let's combine the data and look at the overall success rates. Overall for treatment A, 78%. Overall for treatment B, 83%. Wait, what? Suddenly treatment B looks better overall, even though treatment A was better in every group. That's Simpsons Paradox in action. How can this happen? It all comes down to how the data is weighted, how many cases fall into each category. Let's say treatment A was used mostly for large stones, which are harder to treat, and treatment B was used more for small stones, which are easier. So even though treatment A performed better in both situations, its overall score is pulled down by having a larger share of difficult cases. Meanwhile, treatment B's numbers look better overall because it mostly dealt with easier cases. So the distribution of the data creates a misleading overall trend. A real-world case. Berkeley admissions. One of the most famous examples comes from the University of California, Berkeley in 1973. It looked like Berkeley was discriminating against women in graduate admissions. The overall admission rate was higher for men than women. But when researchers broke it down by individual departments, they found a surprise. Most departments actually admitted women at a higher rate than men. Women had applied more often to competitive departments with lower overall acceptance rates. Men applied more often to less competitive departments with higher acceptance. So once again, in each department, women were treated fairly, or even better. But combined, the numbers appeared biased in the other direction. This wasn't a cover-up or an error, it was Simpsons Paradox. Why it's so important? Simpsons Paradox teaches us a crucial lesson. Statistics can lie if we don't ask the right questions. It reminds us that aggregated data can hide critical details, context matters, and sometimes what looks like the truth isn't the whole picture. This paradox has implications in medicine, public policy, sports, education, criminal justice, and beyond. It can affect how we allocate resources, evaluate fairness, or make life and death decisions. Here is a simple analogy. Imagine two basketball players. In the first half of the season, player A scores 10 points per game, player B scores 8. In the second half, player A scores 12 and player B scores 9. A is better in both halves. But if B played more games during the easier part of the season, and A played more during tough games, then B might have more total points overall, even though A outperformed in both stretches. The key: Performance isn't the only factor. Distribution matters. Simpsons Paradox is more than a statistical quirk. It's a reminder that truth is layered up, and numbers only tell the full story when you understand how they're built. It urges us to go deeper, to question totals, and to look inside the averages that often deceive. So next time someone says, "This number proves it," remember Simpsons Paradox and ask, "Proves it for whom?" Banach Tarski Paradox. Imagine you're holding a solid, perfect sphere, like a smooth rubber ball about the size of your fist. Now imagine slicing it, not with a knife, but with an impossibly precise mathematical tool, into just a few oddly shaped pieces. Here's where it gets strange. You take those pieces, move them around, no stretching, no shrinking, just rotating and shifting. And when you put them back together, you now have two identical balls, the same size as the original. You didn't add any material, you didn't compress anything. Yet somehow one ball has become two. This is the Banach Tarski Paradox, a result from the strange world of set theory and higher mathematics. And it's not a joke, not a mistake, not even a magic trick. It's a mathematically proven result. It's also a paradox so unsettling that it seems to defy reality itself. The paradox was formulated in 1924 by two Polish mathematicians, Stefan Banach and Alfred Tarski. They were exploring ideas in set theory, geometry, and the rules of infinite math, topics that go far beyond the everyday mathematics we use in school. At its core, the Banach Tarski paradox says this: a solid sphere in three-dimensional space can be cut into a finite number of non-measurable pieces, and those pieces can be reassembled using only rotations and translations into two identical spheres, each the same size as the original. It's like taking one apple, slicing it 5 times, and ending up with two identical apples, each just as real, just as big as the first. How is that even possible? The catch: non-measurable sets. To understand why this doesn't instantly break the laws of physics, we need to peek into the world of abstract mathematics. The key idea is something called a non-measurable set. In regular life, we expect to be able to measure the size of things, length, area, volume. But in certain branches of math, especially set theory, it turns out that some sets are so weird, so fragmented, that you can't assign a meaningful size to them. They don't have a volume in the way we usually understand it. The Banach Tarski construction relies on breaking a sphere into 5 of these non-measurable pieces. These pieces are not like slices of a pie. They're made up of infinitely scattered points, arranged in a structure that defies normal geometry. They're more like mathematical dust clouds than solid chunks. Because of this, when you move them around and recombine them, you aren't violating the usual rules of volume, because volume doesn't apply to them in the first place. It's a loophole built right into the structure of infinity. The axiom of choice. The Banach Tarski paradox also depends on something called the axiom of choice, a powerful but controversial principle in set theory. This axiom says, if you have a collection of sets, you can pick one item from each of them, even if there are infinitely many, and no rule tells you how to make the choices. It seems harmless at first, but when applied to infinite sets, the axiom of choice enables constructions like Banach Tarski. It's what allows mathematicians to define those bizarre, non-measurable pieces. Without the axiom of choice, this paradox can't exist. With it, strange new doors open. Does this break physics? Not at all. The Banach Tarski paradox exists in the realm of pure mathematics, not physical reality. In the real world, matter is made up of atoms. You can't cut a basketball into infinitely scattered dust clouds of points. You can't make precise, perfect, infinite choices. And most importantly, you can't ignore conservation of mass. So while the paradox is mathematically valid, it has no physical counterpart. It's not something you could actually do in a lab. You'll never be able to double your lunch by slicing it into paradoxical pieces. Think of it like this. The Banach Tarski paradox is a kind of mathematical thought experiment, a reminder that the universe of math can go far beyond what we experience in space and time. You might wonder, if it doesn't apply to real life, why does it matter? Because it shows the limits of our intuition. It shows that math, like language or logic, can lead to results that challenge our understanding of truth and reality. It also helps mathematicians explore the boundaries of geometry, infinity, and logic. It sparked debates about the axiom of choice, whether it's useful, dangerous, or both. And it illustrates how infinity breaks the rules we rely on in everyday thinking. Banach Tarski isn't just a puzzle. It's a window into the deep structure of mathematics, where concepts like volume, identity, and even space become fluid. The Banach Tarski paradox reminds us of something humbling. In the world of math, even simple objects, a ball, a point, a set, can hide infinite complexity. It challenges the very idea that reality must be logical, that quantity is fixed, or that space behaves in predictable ways. So next time someone tells you you can't make something from nothing, you can smile and say, mathematically, maybe you can. The Ship of Theseus. Imagine a great ship, the pride of ancient Athens, sailing through calm waters under the banner of a legendary hero, Theseus. Over time, the ship is carefully preserved by devoted caretakers. As the years pass, one by one the wooden planks begin to rot, so they're replaced, slowly and lovingly, with new identical pieces. After a century of this careful maintenance, every single part of the ship, every board, every beam, every nail, has been replaced. Here's the question. Is it still the same ship? That's the heart of the Ship of Theseus paradox, one of the oldest and most enduring puzzles in philosophy, where it comes from. The paradox dates back over 2,000 years. It was first recorded by Plutarch, a Greek historian and philosopher. He asked, if the Ship of Theseus had all its parts gradually replaced, was it still the same vessel, or had it become something new? Later, philosophers like Thomas Hobbes added an extra twist. Let's say those original decayed parts weren't thrown away but stored in a warehouse. Over time, someone takes all the old parts and rebuilds the original ship. Now you have two ships, the one made of new materials, maintained over time, the one made of original parts restored after the fact. Which is the real Ship of Theseus? Or are both, or neither? At first, the question seems simple. Identity feels like a yes or no concept. Either something is the same or it isn't. But the Ship of Theseus forces us to confront a deeper truth. What makes something the same? Is it the material it's made from? Is it the continuity over time? Or is it something more abstract, like the function, the name, or even the story we tell about it? That's what makes this a paradox. It exposes a conflict between our intuition and our logic. We think of identity as something stable. You are you. A tree is a tree. A ship is a ship. But identity, especially over time, is slippery. It often depends on what we care about. In the case of the ship, if you value material continuity, then the ship rebuilt from the original wood might be the real one. If you value historical continuity, then the maintained ship, the one that's been sailing all along, is the true successor. If you value function, maybe both are valid. But if both ships exist at once, can they both be the same ship? If two things are truly identical, shouldn't they be indistinguishable? Yet here they are, side by side, not the same, even though both claim the same identity. The Ship of Theseus isn't just a thought experiment. Versions of it appear all around us. Take your body. Every cell in your body dies and is replaced over time. Most of the atoms in your body today weren't there 10 years ago. So are you still the same person? Or think about a classic car. An old Mustang, say, that has had every part restored or replaced. Is it still the original car? And what about digital identity? If you lose all your data and restore it from a backup onto a new machine, same files, same accounts, is it still your system? These aren't just fun questions. They impact how we think about legal identity, personal responsibility, and technology. This paradox also touches on personal identity. If your thoughts, memories, and beliefs gradually change over time, are you still the same you were at age 5? At what point do you become someone else? It's the Ship of Theseus, but with minds instead of wood. Some philosophers argue that continuity of memory defines personal identity. Others say it's about personality, biological continuity, or narrative coherence, the story you tell about yourself. And if those things shift, how much can change before the self disappears? Different philosophical traditions have tried to tackle this puzzle. Essentialists might say there's an underlying essence that makes something what it is beyond its parts. Relational theorists suggest identity is a matter of function and context, not just substance. Buddhist philosophy denies permanent identity altogether, viewing all things, including people, as ever-changing processes. Analytical philosophers sometimes reject the question entirely as ill-defined. saying identity is just a matter of how we choose to use words. So the paradox doesn't just question what something is, it questions how we even define identity in the first place. The Ship of Theseus isn't just a riddle about boats, it's a mirror held up to everything that changes. Ourselves, our relationships, our creations, our culture, even the institutions and memories we build over time. It asks, when does something stop being what it was? What do we hold on to when everything else changes? And it leaves us with a haunting realization. Maybe identity isn't about what something is made of, but about the meaning we attach to it. So whether it's a ship sailing across the Aegean, or the person listening to these words, the Ship of Theseus whispers a timeless question. What exactly makes you, you? Sorites Paradox. Imagine you're standing in front of a small pile of sand. It's nothing impressive, just a modest heap, maybe 10,000 tiny grains resting in the middle of a table. Now picture yourself gently brushing away just one grain. One grain, barely noticeable. Surely you still have a heap. It hasn't suddenly become not a heap just because one speck was taken away. That wouldn't make sense. So you brush away another grain, and another. Still, it's clearly a heap. No dramatic change. You continue this process one grain at a time. You do it slowly, thoughtfully. After all, it's just sand. But somewhere along the way, a strange thing happens. The heap disappears. Not all at once, of course, but grain by grain, the heap becomes not a heap. And here lies the puzzle. At what point did that happen? Was it when there were only 100 grains left? 50? 10? Can a single grain ever truly be called a heap? It seems ridiculous to say yes. But if one grain doesn't make a heap, and removing one grain doesn't destroy a heap, then how does a heap ever stop being one? This is the Sorites Paradox, one of the oldest and most persistent puzzles in philosophy. It's sometimes called the paradox of the heap, and it forces us to confront the blurry edges of language, logic, and common sense. The word sorites comes from the Greek word soros, which means heap. And the problem was first recorded over 2,000 years ago by a Greek philosopher named Eutyphro, the same mind behind the liar paradox. But what makes the Sorites Paradox so fascinating is that it isn't just about sand. It's about how we define anything vague. Let's flip the scenario. Instead of starting with a heap, let's start with a single grain of sand on the table. It's clearly not a heap. Add another grain, still not a heap. Add a third, a fourth, a fifth, still no heap. You keep adding. Grain after grain, eventually something changes. At some unknown number, 5,000, maybe 8,000, you look at the pile and decide, okay, now it's a heap. But when did that transformation happen? Where's the cutoff? That's the power of this paradox. It exposes a flaw in how we use everyday words. Words like heap, tall, rich, bald, or old have no exact thresholds. They're vague, fuzzy, and deeply familiar, yet when we try to pin them down with logic, they fall apart. Now, let's follow the reasoning that turns this into a true paradox. It starts with three assumptions that seem completely reasonable. First, a single grain of sand is not a heap. Second, adding just one grain of sand isn't enough to make something that's not a heap suddenly become a heap. And third, we know from experience that large piles of sand are definitely heaps. Here's the problem. If you accept the first two steps, they logically lead you to deny the third. Because if one grain can't make the difference, then adding one over and over can never transform a non-heap into a heap. It's a logical dead end. Yet we all know that heaps exist, so where do we go from here? One idea is to reject that second assumption, to say, yes, there is some point where adding one grain suddenly crosses the line. Maybe it's arbitrary, maybe it's based on social convention, but somewhere around grain number 3721, a heap appears. The problem is, this feels unsatisfying. We don't talk about heaps that way. It seems silly to say that grain 3720 isn't a heap, but 3721 is. Another approach comes from something called fuzzy logic, a system that allows truth to come in degrees. In this framework, we'd say a single grain is 0% a heap, 10 grains is maybe 5% a heap, 1,000 grains is 60%, and 10,000 is 100%. Instead of a hard line, you get a smooth gradient. This solves the problem by admitting that our categories don't have crisp boundaries, but it also challenges the way we normally think about logic itself. There's also a theory called supervaluationism, which treats vagueness as a kind of ambiguity. It says that if you define heap in many precise but slightly different ways, a statement is true only if it's true in every one of those definitions. If it's true in some but not all, it's undefined. This lets us deal with the fuzziness without rewriting how logic works, but it doesn't make the confusion go away. And while all this might sound like philosophical nitpicking, the Sorites Paradox shows up in real life more than you might expect. When is someone bald? When are they old? At what point is someone rich enough to be taxed more? How much surveillance is too much before it becomes a violation of privacy? In law, politics, medicine, even personal identity, the Sorites Paradox creeps into our thinking. It reminds us that the categories we use to make decisions are often built on shifting sand. In the end, the paradox of the heap asks us a deceptively simple question. When does a thing become something else? There may not be a clean answer. Maybe the truth is that most of what we deal with in life exists in gray zones, not quite one thing, not quite another. And maybe understanding that ambiguity is the key to navigating a world where words like heaps are built one tiny piece at a time. Hilbert's Hotel Paradox. Imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms. That's right, infinite. The hotel stretches endlessly in both directions like something out of a dream. It's called Hilbert's Hotel, named after the German mathematician David Hilbert, who first proposed this strange idea as a thought experiment. Now, even though this hotel has infinitely many rooms, room 1, room 2, room 3, and so on, it's completely full. Every room is occupied, not a single vacancy. But just as the manager is settling down for the night, a new guest arrives. You might think, sorry, we're full. Try another place. But no. At Hilbert's Hotel, there's always room. The manager smiles and says, welcome. We'll make space for you. Then he calls each current guest and says, please move from your current room number N to room number N plus 1. So the person in room 1 moves to room 2, the person in room 2 moves to room 3, the guest in room 3 moves to room 4, and so on. Because there's no last room, this shifting can continue forever. Every guest still has a room, but now room 1 is free, just in time for the new arrival. And that's the magic and madness of infinity. Welcome to Hilbert's Paradox of the Grand Hotel, where the normal rules of space and logic start to break down. Now imagine the next night, infinitely many new guests arrive. Not just one, not 10. An infinite number of them, each with their own suitcase and reservation. They line up outside, waiting. In a normal hotel, this would be a disaster. But Hilbert's Hotel has its own rules. Once again, the manager smiles. He tells every current guest to move from room N to room 2N. So room 1 to room 2, room 2 to room 4, room 3 to room 6, and so on. Now all the odd-numbered rooms, room 1, 3, 5, 7, are empty. And since the odd numbers themselves go on forever, there are now infinitely many empty rooms, ready for the new infinite guests to move in. No one was evicted, no space was added, just reshuffled, endlessly. This idea sounds absurd, but it's completely valid in the realm of mathematics. Hilbert's Hotel was designed to show just how counterintuitive infinity really is. In our everyday world, things are finite. If a hotel has 100 rooms and all are booked, that's it. No more guests. But with infinity, even full doesn't mean completely full in the way we normally think. Let's push it further. What if an infinite number of buses arrive, each carrying an infinite number of guests? Bus 1, bus 2, bus 3, each with guests and seats 1, 2, 3, and so on. Now the challenge is to assign each guest from every bus a room, and no two guests can share. It seems impossible. But it's not. The manager, being quite the mathematician himself, uses a clever trick from number theory. He pairs each bus and seat using a unique mathematical formula, perhaps by assigning each guest a room based on prime numbers or a Cantor pairing function. The point is, there's a way to do it. Every single infinite guest from every infinite bus gets a unique room, and no one is left out. This illustrates a shocking truth. Infinity times infinity is still infinity. Hilbert's Hotel is more than a quirky idea. It reveals that our intuitions about numbers and space break down when we deal with infinite sets. In mathematics, not all infinities are created equal, but they often behave in strange, elegant ways. You can add to infinity, double it, even multiply it by itself, and still end up with infinity. It's like pouring water into a cup that's already full, and yet somehow the cup keeps making room. Now you might be wondering, what's the point of all this? Hilbert's hotel isn't just a mind game. It teaches us about set theory, the branch of math that studies collections of objects, especially infinite ones. It helps us understand the concept of countable infinity, where each item can still be labeled with a natural number, even if the list goes on forever. It also challenges how we define full, complete, or even possible. It pops up in discussions about the size of the universe, the nature of time, and the limits of computation. Even in physics and cosmology, the idea of actual infinities sparks deep debate. But for most of us, Hilbert's hotel is a doorway into the strangeness of the infinite. A reminder that there are places, even just in thought, where the ordinary rules we live by fall away. It tells us that some questions aren't easy, and some truths, especially in mathematics, aren't always intuitive. So next time you find yourself stuck in a long hotel booking queue or pondering the mysteries of forever, just imagine a hallway of endless doors, each ready to open, no matter how full things seem. At Hilbert's hotel, there's always room for one more. The Don Quixote Paradox. Imagine a man who believes he is a knight-errant, destined to revive chivalry and protect the helpless. He dons an old suit of armor, mounts a decrepit horse, and sets out on a quest to right the world's wrongs. His name is Don Quixote. At first glance, his actions seem absurd. He mistakes windmills for giants, flocks of sheep for armies, and inns for castles. Yet in his mind, he is performing noble deeds guided by a code of honor and a sense of purpose. Now consider this. Don Quixote's delusions are so vivid and consistent that they shape his reality. To him, the world conforms to his ideals. The question arises, is he truly mad, or is he simply a man who has chosen to live according to a different set of beliefs? This is the essence of the Don Quixote Paradox, the tension between perception and reality, between individual belief and collective consensus. It challenges our understanding of sanity, identity, and the nature of truth. In the novel, Don Quixote is often portrayed as a figure of ridicule. His actions are seen as comical, his beliefs as misguided. However, Cervantes imbues the character with a depth that invites sympathy and reflection. Don Quixote is not merely a fool. He is a man who dares to dream, to imagine a better world, and to act upon those dreams regardless of the consequences. This paradox extends beyond the character of Don Quixote. It reflects the human condition, the struggle between idealism and realism, between the world as it is and the world as we wish it to be. It asks us to consider the value of imagination, the importance of dreams, and the courage it takes to pursue them, even when they seem unattainable. The Don Quixote Paradox also speaks to the power of narrative. Don Quixote's story is shaped by the tales he reads and the ideals they instill in him. In turn, his actions become a narrative that others interpret and respond to. This interplay between story and reality raises questions about authorship, interpretation, and the role of the reader in creating meaning. Furthermore, Cervantes employs metafictional techniques to blur the lines between fiction and reality. The novel is presented as a translation of a lost manuscript by the fictional historian Cide Hamete Benengeli, adding layers of irony and complexity to the narrative. This self-referential structure invites readers to question the nature of storytelling and the boundaries between fact and fiction. In essence, the Don Quixote Paradox is a reflection on the complexities of human experience. It challenges us to examine our own beliefs, to consider the narratives that shape our lives, and to recognize the power of imagination in creating meaning and purpose. As we reflect on this paradox, we are reminded that the line between sanity and madness is not always clear-cut. Sometimes it is the dreamers, the visionaries, and the idealists who push the boundaries of what is possible, who inspire change, and who remind us of the importance of striving for something greater than ourselves. In the end, Don Quixote's quest may be seen as a metaphor for the human journey, a journey filled with challenges, contradictions, and uncertainties. Yet it is also a journey that holds the potential for growth, discovery, and transformation. So, the next time you encounter someone whose beliefs seem unconventional or whose actions appear irrational, consider the Don Quixote Paradox. Ask yourself, are they truly mad? Or are they simply seeing the world through a different lens? one that challenges the status quo and dares to envision a better future. In a world that often values practicality and conformity, the story of Don Quixote serves as a poignant reminder of the power of imagination, the importance of dreams, and the courage it takes to pursue them, no matter how unattainable they may seem. The Socratic Paradox. A man standing in the heart of ancient Athens, barefoot, cloaked in rags, calmly questioning the most powerful and respected citizens of the city, he asks them what seems like a simple question. What is justice, or what is virtue? They give confident answers, clever definitions shaped by their status, their experience, or their reputation. But the man with a calm smile continues asking questions. Each answer is met with another, deeper question. Slowly and almost gently, he shows them that they don't actually know what they thought they knew. Their confidence begins to erode. Not to humiliate them, but to reveal something much more profound. That true wisdom begins with knowing that you know nothing. That man is Socrates, one of the most famous philosophers in Western history, and this idea that he knows nothing is the heart of the Socratic Paradox. On its surface, it seems contradictory. How can someone claim to know that they know nothing? Isn't that, in itself, a form of knowledge? And if he truly knows nothing, then how can he be so confident in saying so? This puzzle is what we now call the Socratic Paradox, and it invites us to think deeply about knowledge, humility, and the limits of human understanding. To understand the paradox, we turn to Plato's writing, particularly in the dialogue called the Apology, where Socrates defends himself at his trial for corrupting the youth and for impiety. In this speech, Socrates recalls a story. His friend Chaerephon had visited the oracle of Delphi and asked whether anyone was wiser than Socrates. The oracle replied, "No one is wiser." Socrates was baffled by this. He didn't see himself as wise at all. So he set out to test the oracle's statement by speaking with politicians, poets, craftsmen, people with reputations for knowledge and insight. But again and again, Socrates found that while these individuals believed they knew a great deal, their knowledge fell apart under scrutiny. They couldn't explain what they claimed to understand. Socrates realized that while they all thought they knew something, they didn't. And he, by contrast, knew that he did not know. That paradoxically made him wiser. Now here's where the paradox tightens. If Socrates says, "I know that I know nothing," isn't that at least one thing he claims to know? Doesn't that make the statement self-defeating? This is the linguistic and logical puzzle at the heart of the Socratic Paradox. Is Socrates contradicting himself, or is he revealing a deeper form of awareness? One way to resolve the paradox is to suggest that Socrates doesn't literally mean he knows nothing at all. Rather, he means that he lacks certain knowledge, he questions assumptions, avoids dogma, and refuses to claim truth unless it's been rigorously examined. His knowing nothing isn't ignorance, it's intellectual humility. This interpretation is supported by the way Socrates uses questioning, what we now call the Socratic method. It's a disciplined form of inquiry where each belief is tested, each answer met with a further question, peeling back layers, until only uncertainty or truth remains. Socrates isn't trying to destroy knowledge, he's trying to purify it. And in this way, "I know that I know nothing" becomes not a contradiction but a kind of philosophical stance. It's the recognition that human beings are often overconfident in their understanding of the world. Socrates stands apart because he recognizes his limitations, while others mistakenly believe they have knowledge when they do not. Let's think about it in today's context. We live in a time of unprecedented access to information. Search engines, news feeds, and online forums offer quick answers to complex questions. But Socrates would likely ask, how much of this do we really understand? How much of our knowledge is just repetition of things we've heard, read, or assumed to be true? The Socratic Paradox challenges not just individuals but entire societies. It warns us about the dangers of false confidence, of leaders who speak with authority but lack wisdom, and of citizens who stop questioning what they're told. It encourages us to remain curious, keep asking, and stay skeptical, not as cynics, but as learners. And maybe that's the most powerful part of the paradox, that knowing you don't know is actually a form of wisdom, not because it gives you answers, but because it keeps you open to finding them. In the end, Socrates paid the ultimate price for his commitment to questioning. He was sentenced to death by the Athenian court. But even in his final moments, he remained true to his paradoxical belief that it is better to admit ignorance than to live under the illusion of knowledge. So next time you hear someone speak with absolute certainty about things that are complex, ambiguous, or deeply human, pause for a moment. Think of Socrates and ask yourself, is this person wise or just unaware of how little they truly know? The Socratic Paradox isn't just a riddle for philosophers. It's a guidepost for anyone who values truth, humility, and the lifelong journey of learning. The Paradox of Inquiry. Menos Paradox. Imagine you're walking down a winding path in a forest searching for something. Only you don't know what it looks like. You've been told it's important, even life-changing. But here's the catch. You don't know what it is, you don't know where it might be, and you don't even know if it exists. Now ask yourself, how can you find something if you don't know what you're looking for? And if you do happen to stumble upon it, how will you recognize it if you've never seen it before? That is the heart of Menos Paradox, a philosophical puzzle first raised by a man named Menos in a dialogue written by the Greek philosopher Plato and posed to none other than Socrates himself. It's also known as the Paradox of Inquiry, and it goes like this. If you know something, there's no need to inquire about it. You already have the answer. But if you don't know what it is, you can't inquire about it, because you wouldn't even know where to begin. So either you know or you don't. But in both cases, inquiry seems pointless. It's a kind of catch-22 for knowledge. Let's unpack this a bit. In Plato's dialogue, Menos asks Socrates how people learn things, specifically whether virtue can be taught. Socrates responds in his usual style by asking more questions than he answers. Eventually, Menos becomes frustrated and delivers his paradox. How will you look for something when you don't know at all what it is? If you should meet with it, how will you know that this is the thing you didn't know? In modern terms, how can you begin to search for knowledge if you have no idea what the truth looks like? If you're truly ignorant of something, totally in the dark, then how can you recognize the answer, even if it's right in front of you? And yet, we do learn. We ask questions, we explore, we grow, so something doesn't add up. Socrates' answer to the paradox is bold and mysterious. He proposes a theory known as recollection, the idea that the soul is immortal and that all knowledge is already within us from past lives. What we call learning, then, is really a form of remembering. We're not discovering brand new truths, but rather recovering knowledge that our soul has long forgotten. To demonstrate this, Socrates takes a young, uneducated slave boy and asks him a series of questions about geometry. Through guided questioning alone, without giving the boy any answers, Socrates leads him to solve a problem about the area of a square. The boy, without ever having been taught, seems to reconstruct knowledge from within. Now, whether you take the idea of reincarnation literally or not isn't really the point. The deeper meaning is this: we can begin the search for truth even in uncertainty, because we have within us a kind of intuitive structure, a way of recognizing insight when it emerges. In modern terms, we might say we learn through curiosity, pattern recognition, and logic. Even if we can't fully describe the destination, we know enough to take the first steps. When we stumble upon something that clicks, we know we found something valuable, even if we didn't know it beforehand. Menos' paradox is powerful because it forces us to examine how knowledge begins. What does it mean to learn? Is learning a passive reception of information, or is it an active process of discovery? The paradox reminds us that learning often begins in confusion and uncertainty, that not knowing something isn't a dead end. It's the very beginning of inquiry. Think of the first time you tried to learn a new skill, say, playing an instrument or learning a language. At first, you don't even know what you don't know. You're stumbling in the dark. But as you try, experiment and observe, patterns emerge. You begin to ask better questions, and slowly, the unknown becomes familiar. So while Menos' paradox may claim that inquiry is impossible without prior knowledge, our lived experience suggests the opposite. We are wired to seek, to wonder, and to make meaning, even in the absence of clear starting points. This paradox also has implications beyond philosophy. In science, It's the foundation of every hypothesis. Scientists often investigate things they can't yet explain, hoping that through observation and experiment, understanding will take shape. In art, writers and painters create from intuition, not always knowing where their inspiration will lead. In relationships, we try to understand people whose inner worlds we can never fully access. And in each of these cases, we begin with mystery but find our way through the act of seeking itself. So, what does Menos' paradox really teach us? That learning is not about possessing knowledge, it's about pursuing it. It's not about certainty, it's about the willingness to question. And it's not about having all the answers, but about having the courage to begin. Socrates shows us that the wisest people aren't the ones who think they know everything. They're the ones who know how little they know, but who search anyway. So the next time you find yourself facing something unfamiliar or overwhelming, remember Menos' paradox. And take comfort in knowing that asking the right question is already the first step toward the answer. Russell's Barber Paradox. Imagine a small town, a quiet place where everything is neat, orderly, and carefully run. In this town, there is a single barber, just one, and he has a very special job. This barber has one rule. He shaves all the men in town who do not shave themselves. And here's the twist. He does not shave any man who does shave himself. Simple enough, right? At first glance, it seems like a clever system. If you don't like shaving, no problem. The barber will do it for you. If you prefer to shave your own face, then the barber leaves you alone. But now comes the question that sends this entire system spinning into confusion. Does the barber shave himself? Think about it. If he does shave himself, then by his own rule he must not shave himself because he only shaves men who do not shave themselves. But if he does not shave himself, then according to the rule he must shave himself, because he shaves all men who do not shave themselves, and just like that we've walked into a trap. A loop. A logical tangle. No matter what the barber does, shaving himself or not shaving himself, he breaks his own rule. This is Russell's Barber Paradox, named after the British philosopher and logician Bertrand Russell, who introduced it in the early 20th century. On the surface, it feels like a quirky riddle or a joke about facial hair, but beneath it lies a deep and serious issue about logic, self-reference, and the foundations of mathematics. To understand why this paradox matters, let's take a step back. In the early 1900s, mathematicians and logicians were trying to build a flawless system, a structure where every statement could be precisely defined and where logic could provide a solid foundation for all of mathematics. It was supposed to be clean, elegant, and complete. But then Russell's paradox threw a wrench into the entire plan. Russell noticed that the same kind of circular, self-referential logic used in the Barber Paradox could appear in set theory, the branch of mathematics that deals with collections of objects. He asked a question similar in structure. Can there be a set that contains all sets that do not contain themselves? If such a set exists, then if it contains itself, it violates its own definition because it should only contain sets that don't contain themselves. But if it does not contain itself, then by definition it should contain itself. Sound familiar? It's the same logical loop as the barber. In both cases, we're caught in a contradiction caused by a self-referential rule, something that tries to include or exclude itself based on its own definition. Russell's discovery was so significant that it forced mathematicians to rethink the foundations of set theory. Entire systems had to be rebuilt from the ground up to avoid this kind of circular logic. One such system was Zermelo-Fraenkel's set theory, which includes special rules to prevent sets from containing themselves and thus dodges Russell's paradox altogether. It was a direct response to this unexpected hole in the logic of mathematics. But let's step back into the real world for a moment. Why should anyone who isn't a mathematician or logician care about this? Because paradoxes like this one show us something vital about how we think and how we define things. We often try to make the world tidy, putting things into neat categories. But the Barber Paradox warns us that sometimes the categories themselves are flawed. When a rule tries to refer to itself, we have to be careful. Language, definitions, and logic all have limits, and when we ignore those limits, we can end up with systems that look perfect until they break down. This paradox also lives on in other forms. Think of the liar paradox. This sentence is false. If it's true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. The same circular logic, the same breakdown. Or think of programming, where recursive functions that call themselves, must have carefully defined stopping points, or they crash the program. That's Russell's paradox wearing a new face. Even in philosophy and everyday language, we run into this issue. What happens when a law must apply to itself? What happens when someone says, "I always lie"? These aren't just mental puzzles, they reflect the boundaries of logic and meaning. So next time someone offers a simple-sounding rule, a clean system that claims to explain everything, remember the barber. He tried to run a shop based on a logical rule. He just didn't count on the fact that he was part of his own system. And that's the lesson of Russell's Barber Paradox. That in trying to neatly divide the world, we sometimes cut ourselves on the edges of logic. The unexpected hanging paradox. Imagine a prisoner sitting alone in his cell, awaiting judgment. One day the prison warden enters and delivers an unusual message. You will be hanged at noon on one weekday next week, Monday through Friday. But the exact day will be a surprise. You won't know which day it is until the executioner arrives at your cell that morning. The prisoner nods slowly, thinking carefully. At first it sounds terrifying, but then something strange happens. He starts to reason his way out of it. If they're going to surprise me, he says to himself, then I can rule out Friday. Because if I'm still alive by Thursday night, the hanging must be on Friday, making it no surprise. I'd expect it. So Friday's impossible. Then he thinks further. If Friday's ruled out, then Thursday is too. Because if I haven't been hanged by Wednesday night, then Thursday would be the only day left. Again, not a surprise. So he eliminates Thursday, then Wednesday, then Tuesday. Eventually, he concludes that the hanging can't happen at all. There is no way they can surprise him. It's logically impossible. Feeling confident in his deduction, the prisoner relaxes. Perhaps he even sleeps better than he has in weeks. Then on Wednesday morning, the executioner walks in, and the prisoner is completely stunned. It was a surprise after all. This is the unexpected hanging paradox, a logical puzzle that seems airtight at first, until reality breaks through and undoes the reasoning. So what happened? Where did the prisoner go wrong? And how can something that seems logically impossible still happen? Let's dig into it. At the heart of this paradox is a contradiction between logic and expectation. The prisoner reasons that if he can predict the day, then the hanging can't be a surprise. So he begins eliminating possibilities based on what he thinks he'll know in the future. His logic appears to be flawless, but it's built on a subtle error. The error is this. He assumes that just because he can construct a logical argument now, his future self will still believe in that reasoning. But in fact, as each day passes, the situation changes, and his knowledge changes with it. Let's say it's Tuesday night and he hasn't been hanged yet. He tells himself, they can't hang me on Wednesday because then I'd expect it. But the truth is he doesn't. He's convinced that no day will be the day. So when Wednesday arrives, he's genuinely surprised. That's the trap. The paradox exposes the flaw in assuming that our current reasoning perfectly predicts our future state of mind. This puzzle has fascinated philosophers, mathematicians, and logicians for decades. It's sometimes compared to self-referential paradoxes, like the liar paradox, where a sentence refers to itself in a contradictory way. Here, the paradox comes from a recursive thought loop. The prisoner is thinking about his future expectations, which are based on his current expectations, which are based on what he thinks he'll expect in the future. It's a feedback loop of belief. And yet it plays out in real life in subtle ways. Think of situations where someone tries to surprise you. A birthday party, a secret gift. You might try to guess the date, eliminate possibilities, and outthink the surprise. But when the moment finally arrives, it still catches you off guard. Not because your logic was flawed, but because real life doesn't always obey logical certainty. In broader terms, the unexpected hanging paradox speaks to the limits of prediction. It reminds us that just because something seems impossible within a perfectly reasoned system, doesn't mean it can't happen outside of it. It's also been connected to legal and ethical questions. For example, if a judge hands down a surprise sentence, can it be fair? If someone's punishment depends on the element of surprise, does that make it more or less just? In the world of computer science and artificial intelligence, this paradox even touches on algorithmic reasoning. Can a machine truly predict future outcomes if it's reasoning about itself? What happens when the system tries to anticipate its own reactions? At the heart of all these questions is a deeper truth. Human experience often defies the clean rules of logic. Our expectations, emotions, and interpretations create a complexity that no formula can fully capture. So where does that leave our prisoner? Ironically, his logic wasn't completely wrong. He was right that any single day, when considered in isolation, seemed unlikely to bring the surprise. But when the week plays out as a whole, the surprise becomes not just possible, but inevitable. And that's the genius of the paradox. It doesn't ask us to give up on logic. Instead, it reminds us that logic itself has boundaries, especially when it tries to fold in on itself, reasoning about its own reasoning. So the next time you feel like you've outsmarted the world, cracked the code, or anticipated every outcome, remember the prisoner. Remember that even the clearest logic can be surprised by reality. And sometimes the executioner still knocks at the door on Wednesday. Predestination Paradox. Imagine you're sitting in a quiet room when you receive a letter. No return address, no signature. Inside it simply says, "Go to the train station tomorrow at noon, bring nothing. Everything depends on it." Curiosity takes hold. You go. At the station you meet a stranger who seems to know everything about you, things no one else could possibly know. They hand you a device. "Take this back," they say, "and don't ask too many questions. You'll understand one day." Suddenly you're pulled into a machine. Light, noise, a shifting gravity, and when you open your eyes, you're not in your time anymore. You've been sent to the past. There, through a series of improbable events, you meet a young person. They're lost, uncertain, looking for meaning. You guide them, shape their choices. Without even trying, you influence their life. They take a path they never imagined, and as you grow older, it hits you that young person was you. And the stranger who gave you the device, that was you too. This is the predestination paradox, a loop in time where your actions in the past caused the future you came from. You didn't avoid fate, you fulfilled it. You aren't changing history, you were part of it all along. Let's unravel this puzzle. In ordinary life, we think of time as a straight line, past, present, future. The past causes the present causes the future. It's a chain of events, a flow we live inside. But in time travel, that chain can bend. And sometimes it forms a closed loop, where an event in the future causes something in the past, which in turn causes that future event. It's a self-sustaining circle, with no clear beginning. In the predestination paradox, you travel back in time thinking you're changing something, preventing a war, saving a life, warning someone. But your actions don't prevent the event, they cause it. Your attempt to rewrite the future becomes the reason it happens. It's one of the most mind-bending ideas in time travel theory because it challenges everything we think we know about cause and effect. If your future self causes your past, then what's the original cause? Where did it all begin? The answer? Nowhere. That's the paradox. Let's take a famous fictional example. Imagine a firefighter travels back in time to investigate the cause of a mysterious blaze that destroyed a historic building. While trying to prevent the fire, she accidentally causes it. Her attempt to stop it ensures it happens. When she returns to the future, nothing has changed. But everything makes sense now. This kind of paradox is popular in science fiction. You'll see it in stories like 12 Monkeys, Predestination, The Terminator, and even Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Each explores the unsettling idea that time isn't a thing you can escape or rewrite. It's a web you're already entangled in. Now you might wonder, is this even possible? In real physics, some theories allow for this kind of closed-loop timeline. General relativity, Einstein's theory of gravity, permits strange structures in space-time called closed time-like curves, paths through space and time that loop back on themselves. They're purely theoretical for now, but they raise fascinating questions. If these loops are real, then the universe must be self-consistent. That means you can't change the past in a way that contradicts the present. Whatever you do in the past must be part of the timeline all along. This is known as the Novikov self-consistency principle, and it's a scientific version of predestination. It says, sure, you can time travel, but don't expect to rewrite history. Your actions were already part of the story. But here's where it gets really strange. If everything you do is already written into time, do you still have free will? If your future self is guiding your past self and your past self becomes your future self, then your choices feel predetermined, like dominoes falling in a circle. And yet, from your point of view, you made each decision freely. You followed a mysterious letter, you helped a stranger, you traveled through time. It didn't feel like fate, it felt like choice. That's the beauty and the tension of the Predestination Paradox. It asks, is destiny real? Is time flexible or fixed? And more hauntingly, if you could go back and change everything, would you only end up causing it all again? So the next time you wonder about what lies ahead or dream of going back to fix a mistake, think of the loop, the elegant trap, the self-made journey. Think of the version of you who already made the choice, who already shaped the path, and who might be waiting, just around the corner, to hand you the letter that sets it all in motion. Self-creation paradox. A baby is left at the doorstep of an orphanage in the middle of a stormy night. No name, no note, no trace of where they came from. The staff takes the child in, raises them, and over time the baby grows into a curious, intelligent, independent soul, always wondering about their origin, their family, their past. Years later, that child, now an adult, discovers time travel. Not in theory, but in reality. Maybe they stumble onto a secret project. Maybe they're recruited for a mission. Either way, they get into a machine that can pierce the veil of time and emerge years earlier. Back in the past, they meet a young woman. The two grow close. A brief relationship forms. But before long, the time traveler is pulled away, forced to return to their own time. The woman, she becomes pregnant. Not knowing what to do, she delivers the child in secret, and in desperation leaves it at the doorstep of an orphanage. That child grows up, becomes curious, finds time travel, goes back, meets the young woman, and becomes the parent of themselves. They are their own mother, their own father, their own child. This is the self-creation paradox, a time loop so tight, so closed, that the person caught in it has no origin at all. They were never born from outside the loop. No one created them. They simply exist, because they always existed. Let that settle in. A person who is both the cause and the result of themselves. It feels impossible, and yet it fits perfectly within the strange, swirling logic of time travel. This paradox is sometimes considered a special case of the Bootstrap Paradox, where an object or piece of knowledge comes into existence without ever being created. But the self-creation paradox takes it further. It doesn't just involve an object or idea, it involves a human life. A full person. One who creates themselves through time. Philosophically, this is mind-bending. Where did the person come from? If they were never born, in a normal, never conceived in the traditional sense, then who are they really? Are they a glitch in time, a closed loop of existence, or are they just as real as anyone else? The deeper you dig, the stranger it gets. Think about identity. If you're your own parent, your own origin, then your genetic line begins and ends with you. You're not just a person, you're a paradox walking, a loop of DNA and memory. And yet, from your point of view, your life feels normal. You have memories, emotions, dreams, you grow up, you make choices. You're not some hollow puzzle, you're human. And that's what makes the paradox so compelling, because it's not just about logic, it's about what it means to exist. Let's step back for a moment and ask, is this even possible? From a physics perspective, certain solutions to Einstein's theory of relativity allow for something called closed time-like curves, paths through space-time that loop back on themselves. They suggest that, under very specific conditions, events could form a perfect circle, including the creation of a person. But just because math allows it doesn't mean nature does. Some scientists believe that paradoxes like this are signs that nature prevents time travel into the past. This idea, sometimes called the chronology protection conjecture, a term coined by Stephen Hawking, suggests that the universe won't allow events that would create contradictions or paradoxes. Others argue that paradoxes like the self-creation scenario could still happen, but only in consistent timelines. In that case, the paradox isn't a contradiction, it's just a very unusual loop. As strange as it seems, nothing is wrong with it. It all checks out, but we're left with a bigger question. Does an origin matter? If a person lives a full life, forms memories, makes choices, contributes to the world, does it matter if their birth had no outside cause? Or is being real more about the present than the past? This paradox shows up in fiction, most notably in the movie Predestination, based on a story by Robert A. Heinlein. In it, a character experiences the full self-creation loop: born, raised, transitioned, recruited, and sent back, ultimately becoming their own mother and father. It's disturbing, tragic, and strangely poetic. And it raises one final haunting question. If you are your own creator, are you trapped or are you free? In a way, the self-creation paradox is the ultimate expression of self-determination. There's no one to blame, no one to thank. You are the cause of your own existence in every sense. But it also strips away something deeply human: our connection to others, our roots, our shared history, because in this paradox you have none. You are your own beginning, you are your own end, a loop closed and unbroken, perfect and terrifying. Polchinski's Paradox. Imagine a smooth, quiet room in a physics lab, deep underground. In the middle of the room sits something extraordinary: a miniature wormhole, a tiny tunnel in the fabric of space and time, stabilized by exotic matter. It connects 2 points not just across space, but across time. One end of the wormhole opens 5 minutes in the future. The other opens 5 minutes in the past. You could, in theory, roll a billiard ball into one mouth and watch it emerge 5 minutes earlier from the other. Now imagine this. You roll the ball toward the wormhole. It vanishes. But then, just as you're about to lean in and look, the same ball suddenly pops out of the other side 5 minutes earlier than it went in. Only now it's on a collision course with itself. The earlier version of the ball, on its way toward the wormhole, is about to be struck by its future self. The two balls hit. The collision deflects the original ball, and it misses the wormhole entirely. But wait, if the ball never enters the wormhole, then how can it come out to stop itself? And if it doesn't come out, it can't stop itself. But if it doesn't stop itself, then it will go in. And if it goes in, it will come out and stop itself. That is Polchinski's paradox, a time travel scenario that loops in on itself and breaks the rules of causality. A logical contradiction caused by interference between a timeline and its own past. This isn't science fiction. It's a real thought experiment, proposed in 1991 by physicist Joseph Polchinski. He was responding to a question from Kip Thorne. Yes, the same Kip Thorne who helped guide the science behind the film Interstellar. Thorne wanted to explore how time travel might work in the framework of general relativity and whether it could create contradictions. He asked Polchinski, what would happen if you sent a billiard ball through a wormhole to interact with its past self? Polchinski's answer: you could create a paradox. What makes this different from the usual grandfather paradox is that it's rooted in physics, not biology or family trees. It's not about human decisions or moral puzzles. It's about momentum, trajectories, and collisions. Pure mechanics. And that makes it incredibly clean and incredibly disturbing. Because if a simple physical system like a billiard ball can break the rules of time, then time itself might not be as safe and tidy as we hoped. So how do physicists deal with this? There are two major camps. The first says, these paradoxes are a sign that time travel is impossible, that the universe somehow prevents such loops from forming. This is known as the chronology protection conjecture, proposed by Stephen Hawking. According to this view, the laws of nature, quantum effects, radiation instability, kick in to destroy the wormhole before a paradox can form. It's the universe slamming the door before things get too weird. But the second camp has a different idea. They say, maybe paradoxes don't happen because the universe only allows self-consistent timelines. This is the Novikov self-consistency principle. It suggests that anything that happens in a time loop must be consistent with history. You can interact with the past, but only in ways that maintain the loop. You can't prevent yourself from doing something you already did. So how would that work with the billiard ball? Maybe when the ball emerges from the wormhole, it nudges its earlier self, not enough to stop it, but just enough to redirect it slightly, onto a path that leads it right into the wormhole at just the right angle to cause that same nudge. A perfect loop. No contradictions. It's like a riddle that answers itself, an event that is both the cause and the result of itself. Strange, yes, but not impossible. These ideas sound abstract, but they reach into some of the deepest questions we can ask. Is the universe deterministic? Can we really change the past? Or are we living inside a story that's already written? Polchinski's paradox forces us to face the uncomfortable possibility that some things can be both cause and effect at the same time. And it challenges our trust in what time really is. We like to think of time as a straight line, moving cleanly from past to future. But if time can curve back on itself, if events can loop, twist, and fold, then we're dealing with something far stranger than clocks or calendars. We're dealing with a structure that may allow things to exist without a clear beginning, or to cause themselves into being. So imagine again, a ball rolls across a table, it vanishes into a wormhole, and reappears just in time to strike itself. It was always going to happen, and it never could have happened any other way. That's Polchinski's paradox, a puzzle of time, a challenge to logic, and a whisper from the edge of physics, telling us that the rules might be more flexible than we think. The memory paradox. Imagine waking up one day with a memory you don't recognize. You're certain it's yours, it feels real, vivid, like something you lived through. But it's a memory of an event that hasn't happened yet, a conversation that hasn't been spoken, a place you've never visited, a decision you haven't made. At first, you think it's a dream. But then, weeks later, it happens, exactly as you remembered it, word for word, scene for scene. How could you remember the future? Now imagine you travel back in time, not by accident, not by machine, but because you choose to. Maybe to warn someone, maybe to change something. You go back, interact with your past self, and give them a vital piece of information, something that will protect them, guide them, shape their path forward. And then, you return to your own time, but something's wrong. The memory your past self now holds, the one you gave them, is not in your mind anymore. You remember going back. You remember the mission, but the message. But not the message. The very act of changing your past self's knowledge has altered your own memories of it. And now, in this altered present, you can no longer remember what you once knew, because you gave it away. This is the memory paradox. A subtle, chilling contradiction in time travel, where what you remember and what you do cannot exist together. It's not as loud or dramatic as killing your grandfather or becoming your own parent. But it cuts just as deep, because it calls into question the one thing we rely on every day, our own sense of continuity, our memories, our identity. Let's take a closer look. At its heart, the memory paradox asks a simple question. If you change your past self's memories, do you still remain you? Or imagine this, you send your younger self a warning. Don't trust John, the message says. He betrays you. You know this because you lived it. You remember the pain, but when your younger self reads that message, they avoid John. They never become close. There's no betrayal. The trauma never happens. And so, when you return to your present, you no longer remember it either. Now you're left wondering, why did you go back in time in the first place? What motivated you? You remember sending the message, but not the reason. You've erased the experience that prompted the change, and in doing so, you've erased your own past self. This paradox puts pressure on the relationship between memory and identity, because who we are is largely defined by what we remember. If you strip away those memories, or overwrite them, you're not just changing facts, you're changing yourself. It's the time travel version of cutting off the branch you're sitting on. In some ways, the memory paradox is a cousin of the grandfather paradox. But instead of killing your ancestor, you're altering the mental chain that makes you, you. It also shares DNA with the Bootstrap Paradox. After all, if knowledge or memories are passed back in time and become the source of themselves, then who actually originated them? Did you remember something because you lived it? Or because someone told you, who only knew it because you remembered it? The loop closes, the cause disappears, and what's left is a memory with no origin. A self-contained fragment of thought, existing only because it always has. Fiction plays with this idea in quiet, eerie ways. In films like Tenet or Arrival, knowledge of the future alters behavior in the present, which then shapes the future into what was remembered. Memory becomes not just personal, but deterministic. So what do scientists and philosophers make of this? Some theories, like the Novikov self-consistency principle, argue that you can't change your memories or your past in a way that would create contradiction. If you remember something, then it must have always happened. If you go back and change the past, it won't be the real past. It will branch off into another timeline, and your memories will stay intact in your own. This is where the many worlds interpretation comes in. According to this theory, each change creates a new universe, and your memory remains consistent in your own branch. The paradox vanishes, but so does the idea of one continuous self. You're now just one version among infinite copies. But if we stick to a single timeline, the memory paradox stands, and it whispers something chilling. You can't change the past without changing yourself. You can't go back, whisper in your own ear, and expect to return unchanged. Because the person you warned will become someone new, someone who never went through what you did. And if that person is you, then who are you now? So the next time you wish you could go back and warn yourself, stop a heartbreak, avoid a mistake, skip the pain, ask yourself this: would that version of you even recognize the person you've become? Or would they live a different life with different memories and never know the reason why? That's the memory paradox. Not a clash of physics, but a question of self, a fracture in identity, a loop of forgetting and remembering, and a quiet reminder that even in time travel, some things once changed can never be unremembered, because they were never remembered in the first place. Ontological Causation Paradox. Imagine you're walking through a dusty second-hand bookstore. The air smells like paper and time. You're not looking for anything in particular, but one book catches your eye. It's old, leather-bound and worn, with no title on the spine. Curious, you open it. The contents are astonishing. Inside are theories, ideas, maybe even blueprints that seem ahead of their time. Something about this book feels personal, like it was written for you. You buy it, take it home, and become obsessed. Years pass, you study it, replicate it, and eventually expand it. One day you decide to publish your version of it. It becomes your life's work. People read your book. History moves forward. But then something strange happens. A future version of you, older, perhaps a little worn down, appears, and they hand you a book, the original one, the one you found all those years ago in the bookstore. You take it, stunned, and travel back in time. You leave it on the shelf, knowing your younger self will find it. And now the question strikes you, cold and quiet. Who wrote the book? Not you. Not really. You only copied what you read. But the book existed because you brought it back in time. It came from nowhere. It has no origin. That is the ontological causation paradox, a loop in time where something exists simply because it always has. A book, a piece of knowledge, a machine, or even a person, created by a future that only exists because of its own past. A paradox with no beginning and no end. Ontological comes from ontology, the study of being, of existence. And this paradox strikes at the heart of that idea. Can something exist without ever being created? On the surface, it might sound like a variant of the Bootstrap Paradox, and in a way, it is. But while Bootstrap paradoxes are about objects or information existing in a loop, ontological causation zooms out and asks the deeper question. What happens when causality itself becomes untethered? Let's break it down. In our world, everything has a cause. A seed grows into a tree. A spark starts a fire. A thought becomes a decision. There is always something that comes before, a source, an origin. But in the ontological causation paradox, the chain breaks. Something exists not because it was caused, but because it caused itself. It's a perfect circle, self-contained, self-justified, and entirely bizarre. Think of a time traveler who gives Beethoven his own symphonies hundreds of years before they were ever written. Beethoven hears them, learns from them, and becomes the composer we know, only because he heard what he was destined to write. But then, who originally composed the music? No one. Or rather, everyone in the loop. The paradox arises because our minds reject the idea of something existing without a first cause. We're trained to look for beginnings. But time loops like these, if possible, have no first moment. Every event is both cause and effect, past and future, origin and consequence. So, is this just science fiction? Or could it really happen? In theoretical physics, particularly in models that allow for closed time-like curves, solutions to Einstein's equations that permit time loops, such paradoxes might actually be consistent. In these strange geometries of space-time, an object or idea can exist in a self-sustaining loop, with no violation of the known laws of physics, just of our common sense. But if ontological loops are possible, they raise enormous questions. Where does originality come from? Can a thing exist without being invented? If an idea is passed through time and becomes its own origin, is it truly knowledge or just a looped copy of itself? Philosophers argue that this paradox undermines the very idea of creativity and innovation. If everything comes from somewhere, then loops like these seem like a cheat code, something from nothing. But others see something strangely beautiful in it, a universe that can contain loops of meaning, things that exist not linearly, but circularly, like myths or poems written outside of time. There's another twist too. What if the thing caught in the loop isn't a book or a song, but a person? Imagine a baby is left at an orphanage, grows up, discovers time travel, goes back and becomes the very parent who dropped them off. They are their own origin, a human being who exists because they always have. Now we're not just dealing with physics or logic, we're dealing with identity, with being, with existence itself. So what do we take away from this? Maybe it's a warning that if time travel ever becomes real, we must tread carefully with causality, with creation, with the fragile chain that binds past to future. Or maybe it's an invitation to see time not as a line, but as a story that can double back, reference itself, echo its own words. A story where some things exist not because they were made, but because they were meant to be. So the next time you stumble upon something you can't explain, a brilliant idea, a work of genius, a moment that feels familiar, ask yourself, where did it come from? And if the answer is nowhere, maybe, just maybe, it came from you. Because you were always going to find it. Because it was always going to be found. The Hitler Paradox. Imagine stepping out of a humming metallic time machine into a quiet moonlit street. It's Austria. The year is 1889. The world is calm, innocent. For now, you're standing in front of a small house, holding a photograph of a newborn. That newborn is named Adolf Hitler. You've traveled back through time on a mission that's haunted people for generations, to prevent the rise of one of history's most infamous tyrants, to stop a war before it ever begins, to erase a genocide before it's even conceived. You walk through the door. The child is asleep in his crib, peaceful, unaware. This is your chance. This is your moment. And then you freeze, because a terrible thought hits you. What happens if you succeed? That's the core of the Hitler Paradox, one of the most famous time travel dilemmas in both philosophy and fiction. On the surface, the solution seems simple. Go back in time, eliminate Hitler and save millions of lives. But dig just a little deeper, and the clean, heroic idea starts to unravel. If you go back and kill Hitler before he rises to power, then World War II never happens. The Holocaust never occurs. Europe never descends into chaos. Millions live, the world changes in countless ways. But here's the problem. If Hitler never comes to power, then you never had a reason to go back in time in the first place. Your mission disappears. Your motivation vanishes. The entire reason you stepped into that time machine is gone. So if you never went back, Hitler would rise again. But if you did go back, he wouldn't. And if he doesn't, you wouldn't go back. And if you don't go back, he survives. It's a loop, a contradiction, a paradox. This is what makes the Hitler Paradox so haunting. It isn't just about ethics. It isn't just about heroism. It's about causality itself, the chain of cause and effect that ties our choices to their consequences. And in this case, the chain twists into a knot that no logic can untangle. Let's take it a step further. Say you don't kill Hitler. Maybe you try to redirect his path, give him a scholarship, help him become an artist, prevent his bitterness from taking root. A more peaceful solution. But what if removing Hitler just opens the door for someone worse? Someone more cunning, less erratic, more effective. Someone who commits the same horrors, but wins. Or maybe in the absence of Hitler, the war still happens, but in a different shape. Maybe it lasts longer. Maybe nuclear weapons are used earlier. Maybe trying to change history only makes it darker. This is the unintended consequences problem that haunts every time traveler. History isn't a straight line, it's a web. Tug on one thread, and the whole tapestry shifts in ways you can't predict. Now, modern fiction often dances around this in clever ways. In Deadpool 2, a deleted post-credit scene shows Deadpool confronting baby Hitler. He stares down into the crib, torn between the innocence of the child and the horror of the man he'll become. He can't bring himself to do it. It's played for laughs, but underneath there's a real painful question. Can you punish someone for a crime they haven't committed yet? That's where the paradox turns ethical. Killing baby Hitler might save the future, but in that moment, he's still just a child. Are you a murderer? A savior? Both? This same question plays out in different forms in the Avengers universe, Doctor Who, The Umbrella Academy, and The Flash. Some of these shows dodge the paradox by introducing multiverse logic. If you change the past, they say, you don't rewrite your own timeline. You create a new branch, a parallel world. Your original timeline stays intact. That's one way to escape the paradox. But it raises a new one. If you only save a parallel universe and your original world remains broken, what did you really accomplish? The Hitler paradox doesn't just challenge the mechanics of time travel. It forces us to think about fate, free will, and the nature of history itself. Do events like Hitler's rise happen because of one man? Or because of 100 complex factors, social unrest, political mistakes, economic collapse, cultural shifts? Can you really stop evil by stopping one person? Or does it simply take another form? In the end, maybe the most disturbing part of the Hitler paradox isn't the time travel or the logic. Maybe it's this. If you had the chance to stop the worst evil in history, would you become something unthinkable to do it? Would you rewrite your own morality in order to save millions? Would you risk creating a future you can't understand because the one you know is so horrific? Or would you walk away, haunted by the knowledge of what you could have done and terrified of what it might have meant? That's the paradox, not just in time but in choice, not just in history but in us. Temporal loop trap. Imagine waking up one morning in a cold, dimly lit room. The clock on the wall ticks to 7 a.m. You sit up, a little dazed, unsure how you got there. You stumble out into the hallway. The lights flicker. A voice crackles over a speaker. Initiate sequence. Room reset in 12 hours. You shrug it off, you explore, you find a diary, a journal that seems to be in your handwriting. You flip it open, and inside, in bold letters, it reads, "You've done this before. Don't trust the woman in the red coat. You have until 7 p.m. to break the loop." At first it seems like a game, but then the day unravels. You meet people who somehow seem to know you. Events unfold that feel eerily familiar, and just when you think you've made a breakthrough, everything resets. 7 a.m. Again, the same room, the same clock, the same beginning. This is the temporal loop trap, a time travel paradox where a person or event becomes trapped in an endlessly repeating segment of time, with no obvious way out. Every day, every choice, every moment repeats, sometimes identically, sometimes subtly different, but always returning to that same point, over and over, forever. The paradox is not just in being caught in time, it's in the consequences of memory, identity, and free will inside that loop. Because once you realize you're trapped, the question changes from what's happening to how do I escape? And sometimes, there is no escape. We've seen versions of this in fiction. In Groundhog Day, the loop is comedic and redemptive. A man relives the same day until he becomes a better version of himself. In Edge of Tomorrow, it's violent and strategic. Each loop is a chance to learn, survive, and eventually win. In Doctor Strange, it's used as a clever trap, an endless loop weaponized as a kind of cosmic negotiation. But underneath the storytelling lies a terrifying idea. What if time can fold in on itself? What if time doesn't always flow forward? What if it curls back and keeps you? The science behind it, while theoretical, isn't pure fantasy. Physicists like Kurt Gödel and Kip Thorne have explored the possibility of closed time-like curves, paths through space-time that loop back to their own starting point. In theory, a traveler could follow this curve and return to the same moment in time, not just once, but endlessly, unless something breaks the cycle. And that's where the trap lies. A temporal loop trap is not just a glitch in time, it's a cage. And often, the person inside it doesn't even know they're trapped until they start remembering. The paradox deepens when memory enters the loop. In some stories, you forget everything when the loop resets. You live the same day again with no awareness. But in others, you keep your memories. You carry them forward. You try new things, make different choices, push the boundaries, and then you realize every road leads back to the same beginning. Some loops are triggered by events, like your own death, die, and time resets. Others are time-based, reach a certain hour, and the loop restarts. And in some of the darkest versions, you create the loop without knowing it. Maybe you tried to prevent a catastrophe and instead locked time into an endless rewind. Maybe you tried to save someone, and the universe keeps dragging you back to the moment you failed. Maybe your escape attempt is the very thing that causes the trap. It's not just a logical loop, it's an emotional one. You start questioning yourself. Have I tried everything? Did I already try this and forget? Is there even a way out? Then you ask the hardest question of all. What if this is it? What if you're not in a loop because something's broken, but because something decided you were never meant to leave? That's where the temporal loop trap becomes existential. Because time isn't just ticking forward, it's folding inward, it's holding you, and it's making you watch yourself. Over and over. So why does this paradox fascinate us so much? Maybe because deep down we all feel trapped sometimes, caught in routines, repeating mistakes, reliving regrets. The loop is a metaphor, yes, but it's also a mirror. It shows us what it means to be stuck, to learn, to change, or to fail to. And like all paradoxes, it asks a haunting question. If time turned against you, could you ever outsmart it? Or would you spend eternity retracing your own footsteps, trying to break a cycle that never had a beginning and may never have an end? That is the temporal loop trap. A paradox, a punishment, a puzzle with no exit, unless, somewhere, somehow you already found the key and forgot. Observer effect in time. Imagine you're watching a moment unfold from behind a one-way mirror. In front of you, a man is sitting at a table, tapping a pen nervously. He doesn't know you're watching. You're not interacting, not speaking, not interfering. You're simply there, an observer, silent, detached, harmless, or so you think. Now imagine that just by watching, you're not only seeing what's happening, you're changing it. The pen pauses. The man shifts in his chair. He stares at the ceiling, as if trying to remember something. You blink, and everything moves in a slightly different direction than it would otherwise. That is the observer effect in time. The idea that merely observing an event can change its outcome, not just in the present, but in the past or future, depending on how and when the observation occurs. It sounds like science fiction, but at the edges of physics and philosophy, this is a real and unsettling paradox. Let's rewind for a moment. In quantum mechanics, there's a well-known phenomenon, the observer effect. At the smallest scales, particles, electrons, photons, the active measurement changes the thing being measured. A particle that exists in many places at once, the infamous quantum superposition, collapses into one defined state the moment you look at it. In other words, when you observe it, you make it real. But what happens if you apply this idea, not just to particles, but to time itself? Let's say you invent a method to look into the past. You don't travel there. You don't interact. You just observe, like watching an old film. You see someone hiding a key, or writing a note, or making a decision that ripples into your present. But here's the twist. Now that you've seen it, the present changes. The memory wasn't yours before, but now it is. The key wasn't there before, but now it is. You've observed the past, and your present has rearranged itself to make room for what you saw. You didn't touch anything. You didn't interfere. You simply looked. And that was enough. The observer effect in time asks us to reconsider the nature of cause and effect. Is the past fixed, or is it shaped by what we know about it? It's not just theory. Experiments in quantum physics, like the delayed choice quantum eraser, show that actions in the present can affect how particles behaved in the past, even after those particles have already been measured. Yes, you heard that right. The present choice to observe can alter what happened before. At the quantum level, time is flexible, wobbly, malleable. But what if that applies beyond particles? What if it applies to events or even lives? Let's take a fictional example. You find an old camera that lets you view any day in the past, but only once. You use it to watch your childhood home on the day your father disappeared. As you watch, you see something you were never meant to see, a hidden letter, or a different decision, or a face you don't recognize. And now that you've seen it, your memories shift. History adjusts itself to include this new truth. The world you knew before starts to vanish, replaced by the version you now remember. You didn't change the past, you only witnessed it. But witnessing was enough. This paradox becomes even deeper when we realize that in many interpretations of time and reality, observation and awareness are not passive, they are active forces. What you know changes what is. The moment you observe a moment in time, past, present, or future, you shape the conditions of reality around that moment. The future unfolds differently because of what you saw. The past may reshape itself because of how your knowledge bends toward it. So what does that mean for us? Are we walking through time as passive travelers? Or are we shaping it second by second just by perceiving it? Some interpretations of physics suggest that time is not linear, but layered, like a book we read page by page, though the pages themselves already exist. Observation is like a light, illuminating only the part of the story we're focused on, while the rest remains flexible in the shadows. But the moment we read a page, we fix it. We make it real, unchangeable. And maybe in that sense we don't travel through time. We collapse it moment by moment by choosing what to observe. So here's the real question behind the observer effect in time. What moments are still waiting to become real, only because you haven't looked at them yet? And once you do, what part of your life will change forever? Because in the strange theater of time, you are not just a spectator, you are the camera, you are the lens. And sometimes, just by watching, you are the one who writes the script. The Information Paradox. Imagine you're standing at the edge of the universe, not metaphorically, literally. In front of you looms a black hole, an ancient beast of gravity so dense, so powerful, that not even light can escape its grasp. Space bends, time stretches, the laws of physics begin to fray like old rope, and just beyond that invisible veil, the event horizon, anything that crosses is lost forever. Or so we thought. Now imagine you watch as a spaceship, small, silent, and packed with data, drifts toward the event horizon. On board are journals, photographs, algorithms, memories, information. Decades of work, a digital library of thought, invention, and story. It passes the point of no return, and then it's gone. But where did that information go? That is the heart of the black hole information paradox, a mystery so deep it shook the foundations of physics and still remains unsolved. To understand the paradox, we need to go back to the basics of black holes. According to Einstein's theory of general relativity, when a massive star dies, it can collapse under its own gravity to a single point of infinite density, a singularity. Around it forms the event horizon, the boundary beyond which nothing escapes. For decades, physicists believed that anything crossing that horizon was lost forever. Mass gets added to the black hole. But all details of what fell in, its structure, information, identity, are erased. Now, this poses a problem, because according to quantum mechanics, information is never truly lost. You can burn a book and its pages may turn to ash, but in theory, if you had enough data, you could reconstruct every word from the smoke and heat. The universe keeps a record. But in a black hole, that record vanishes. At least, that's what classical physics tells us. Enter Stephen Hawking. In the 1970s, Hawking made a shocking discovery. Black holes aren't completely black. They emit radiation, now called Hawking radiation. Over immense spans of time, they can actually shrink and disappear. But there's a catch. Hawking radiation appears to be random. It carries no information about what went into the black hole. If the black hole evaporates and the radiation tells us nothing, then all the information about what fell in, planets, particles, people, is truly gone. And that violates quantum law. It's like reading a mystery novel where every clue is destroyed, and you're told the ending doesn't matter anymore. It breaks the rules. It doesn't sit right. It means the universe has holes not just in space, but in knowledge itself. And so we have the paradox. If black holes destroy information, quantum mechanics is wrong. But if quantum mechanics is right, then black holes can't destroy information, but they evaporate, and the information doesn't seem to come out. Physicists around the world were stunned. For the first time, the two pillars of modern science, relativity and quantum mechanics, directly contradicted each other, and nobody could agree which one to let go. Over the decades, theories emerged. Some propose that information is encoded in the Hawking radiation in ways we don't yet understand, hidden patterns in the chaos. Others said the information might be stored on the event horizon itself, like a kind of hologram, a cosmic recording surface that burns everything it consumes into a two-dimensional imprint. That gave rise to the holographic principle, the idea that everything inside the universe might actually be encoded on its outer surface, just like a 3D image projected from a 2D film. Others speculated that black holes don't destroy information, they transport it to new universes. Entire realities born from collapsed stars. Information isn't lost, just moves out of reach. And still others have suggested even stranger ideas, like black holes having firewalls that incinerate information at the horizon. But that too creates paradoxes because it breaks the smooth fabric of space-time Einstein described. The information paradox isn't just about what black holes do, it's about what reality is made of. It forces us to confront questions like, is the universe deterministic, or is there true randomness? Can information ever be deleted, or is it eternal? And if a record of everything still exists, where is it kept? In recent years, breakthroughs in string theory, quantum gravity, and black hole entropy have brought us closer to answers. The idea gaining traction today is that information may leak out of black holes, slowly, subtly, encoded within the Hawking radiation in complex ways, like a message in a bottle, scattered across time. If that's true, the paradox may finally be resolved. But even then, we are left with something deeper, something more unsettling. Because if black holes remember everything, then the universe remembers everything. Every action, every thought, every particle, nothing truly disappears. The black hole is no longer a void, but a vault, a cosmic library hidden beyond a veil of gravity. And perhaps one day when our understanding is ready, we'll learn how to read what's been written inside. Until then, we stand at the edge of the event horizon, watching, wondering, asking the one question that defies both time and gravity. Can anything truly be forgotten? Multiple timelines paradox. Imagine you make a decision, just a small one. You're standing at a train station and two trains arrive at once. One goes north, one goes south. After a pause, you choose north. And as your train pulls away, you wonder, what would have happened if you'd chosen differently? Now imagine that somewhere out there, in a universe that branches and bends, there's another version of you. One who chose the southbound train. One who took a different path, met different people, lived a different life. And imagine that every choice you've ever made has spawned another timeline, where a different version of you lives with the consequences. That's the idea behind multiple timelines, the concept that time doesn't follow one clean, continuous thread, but rather fractures into countless possibilities. Each timeline a world, each decision a doorway, each fork in the road the birth of a new reality. It sounds poetic, even hopeful, but it leads us to a problem, a strange, tangled riddle called the multiple timelines paradox. And it begins with one simple question. If multiple timelines exist, can they interact? Let's say you invent a time machine. You travel to the past to stop a terrible event, perhaps a war, a disaster, or a death. You intervene. History changes. But here's the twist. When you return to your original time, nothing has changed. The world is still broken. The war still happened. The person is still gone. Why? Because you didn't change your timeline. You created a new one. A branching path. A world where the disaster was avoided, but not your world. This is the core of the paradox. If time is a tree and every choice a new branch, then time travel doesn't overwrite the past. It splits it. And once split, the question becomes, do these timelines run parallel forever? Can they ever merge? Can someone or something move between them? And if they can, what happens when two versions of the same person meet? Let's say you meet another you, one from a timeline where everything went right. They're confident, successful, unscarred, and they look at you with pity, or maybe envy. Would you still be you? Or would you start to fracture, identity pulling in multiple directions, each version of you claiming to be the real one? The paradox deepens when you consider consequences. If timelines branch infinitely, then anything is possible. Somewhere, Hitler was never born. Somewhere, the Titanic missed the iceberg. Somewhere, you're president. Somewhere, you never existed at all. And that leads to another contradiction. If everything happens in some timeline, does anything really matter? If every outcome is guaranteed somewhere, if every path is taken in some version of reality, Then what is the value of choice? Are you responsible for the world you live in? Or just one of infinite versions of yourself, none of which can claim to be the true you? The multiple timelines paradox isn't just about science fiction or alternate realities. It's a philosophical knot about meaning, morality, and identity. Some physicists, particularly those who support the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, suggest that every quantum event splits the universe. Every time a particle goes left or right, a new world is born. That means the universe is not a singular stream, but a constantly dividing ocean of possibility. But here's where it gets weird. If all these universes exist, can information or energy ever pass between them? What if someone learns how to move through timelines like doors in a hallway? What if someone could steal knowledge from another timeline? Technologies, outcomes, even lives. Would that be discovery or theft? And if one timeline causes harm to another, if one version of humanity reaches into another's world and changes it, who's responsible? In fiction, we see this dilemma play out often. In Loki, the Marvel Universe introduces the Time Variance Authority, an organization that prunes timelines to preserve a single sacred timeline. But that act itself becomes a moral paradox. Who decides which timeline is sacred? Who gets to exist? In Everything Everywhere All at Once, the chaos of multiple timelines colliding leads to both madness and meaning, forcing characters to choose which version of themselves they want to embrace. And in real life, we're left with questions that science hasn't answered. Are multiple timelines real? If they are, can they overlap? And if they do, are we in danger of meeting ourselves? Because that moment, when two versions of one person look into each other's eyes, is where the paradox explodes. Not because they exist, but because one may have to decide who deserves to continue. In the end, the multiple timelines paradox isn't just about time travel or branching universes. It's about what happens when reality itself becomes plural. When identity becomes layered, when cause and effect lose their meaning. And when we must ask the hardest question of all, if every version of me exists somewhere, what does it mean to be me right here, right now? Tyrant's Paradox. Imagine a kingdom, long ago, or perhaps not so long. The people are afraid, the crops are dying, crime runs rampant in the streets, the old leaders were weak, indecisive, paralyzed by compromise. Chaos had crept into every corner of life. And then he came, a man with power, vision, authority. He crushed the gangs, restored order, made the trains run on time. He rebuilt roads, silenced corruption, and declared this land will rise again. And for a time it did. But with peace came price. Dissent was outlawed, free speech withered. The law no longer served the people, but the man who now stood above it. He demanded loyalty. He crushed opposition. He called it unity. And so order became oppression. Security became surveillance. The people, once free but afraid, were now safe, but silent. This is the heart of the Tyrant's Paradox, a chilling contradiction that is echoed across centuries. To protect freedom, must we sometimes destroy it? To save the people, must one rise above them? Can a tyrant be necessary and still be wrong? The paradox emerges when a ruler, often rising in a time of desperation, claims that only through absolute power can society be preserved. And here's the haunting part. Sometimes they're not entirely wrong. History has shown that tyranny can bring stability. Empires have flourished under iron-fisted leaders. Wars have ended, economies have grown, but always at a cost. So the paradox becomes this: if tyranny works, does that make it right? Let's bring it closer. Imagine your city is collapsing. Crime is out of control. Leaders are helpless, and one figure steps forward promising to fix everything. They ask for emergency powers, just temporarily, just until things are back to normal. And you say yes, because you're scared, because you need hope, because you're tired of chaos. But the powers never go away. The elections stop, the voices fall silent, and suddenly you've traded liberty for order, and it feels irreversible. That's the Tyrant's Paradox, the idea that sometimes a society will willingly accept authoritarianism to protect itself, even though that protection may become a prison. You see, a tyrant often begins not as a villain, but as a savior. They are welcomed, cheered, even begged for. The paradox isn't just about what the tyrant does, it's about what the people allow. Because here's the truth: a tyrant may not seize power, we may give it to them. And yet, Even when the tyrant becomes cruel, even when the fear sets in, some still whisper, yes, but at least there's order now. That lingering justification, that whisper of it's better than before, is the paradox's poison. It clouds judgment, it justifies oppression. It says, yes, we are not free, but we are safe. Now consider another side. Let's say the tyrant never rose. The people stayed free, but chaos consumed them. Civil war erupted. Factions tore society apart, millions died. So now we must ask, is tyranny worse than collapse? Is brutal order better than bloody freedom? And if a tyrant prevents suffering, is that mercy or manipulation? The Tyrant's Paradox forces us to confront an uncomfortable idea. Sometimes the worst people arrive in the worst moments, and they seem like the only answer. But even when their rule begins in necessity, it rarely ends that way. Power consolidates. Fear replaces law. Loyalty becomes law. And suddenly the very system that was meant to protect the people becomes a weapon used against them. History echoes with examples. Julius Caesar was welcomed for restoring order to a crumbling Roman Republic. Napoleon rose as a hero of the revolution, only to crown himself emperor. Hitler was elected during a time of economic ruin and national humiliation. Countless others followed the same path, from liberator to ruler to tyrant. And every time society said, this time it's different. This time we need him. This time we have no choice. But we always have a choice. The paradox isn't just about rulers, it's about us. What we tolerate, what we fear, what we give away when we're desperate to be saved. So maybe the real tyrant's paradox isn't whether power corrupts, it's whether we let it, because we find comfort in control. In the end, the tyrant is only half the story, the other half is the people who kneel. And the hardest question of all isn't, can we stop him? It's, would we even want to? Because when the banners fly, and the streets are clean, and the anthem plays loud enough to drown out the doubt, it can be hard to remember what freedom sounded like. The Democratic Paradox. Imagine a country built on freedom, a land where every citizen has a voice, where votes shape the future, and where power belongs not to kings or tyrants, but to the people. It begins with hope. With revolution, maybe, with the casting off of old chains, old crowns, old orders, and in their place, democracy. The promise that all are equal, that power is shared, that law serves not the few but the many. For a while it works. Elections happen, voices are heard, progress stirs, and people say, this is it, this is what justice looks like. But then something strange begins to happen. A group rises, angry, loud, and growing. They claim the system is broken. They claim the majority is being ignored. They call for new laws, new leaders, a return to values they believe have been lost. They organize, they rally, they vote, and to everyone's surprise, they win. Suddenly, democracy begins to vote itself into something else. Civil liberties are cut back, minority rights are rolled back, independent judges are dismissed, the press is labeled an enemy, dissent becomes dangerous. And all of it, every law, every restriction, every punishment, is carried out legally by elected leaders with majority support. This is the Democratic Paradox. What happens when democracy chooses to undo itself? What if the will of the majority threatens the rights of the individual? Can a system dedicated to freedom survive the freedom to destroy it? That's the contradiction. Democracy is built on two foundational principles: the will of the people, the protection of rights. But what happens when those two principles collide? What happens when the people vote away rights? When they choose inequality? When they elect a leader who doesn't believe in the very system that allowed him to rise? In a true democracy, the people are sovereign. But people are not perfect. They can be angry, they can be misled, and in those moments, democracy can become the tool of its own destruction. We've seen it before. Adolf Hitler was elected in a democratic system. So were many of the world's most oppressive regimes. Not through coups, not through force, but through votes, through the will of the people. So what do? Do we limit democracy to save it? Do we say, yes, you have freedom, but not that kind? Can we call it democracy if we don't trust the people to choose wisely? This is where the paradox tightens its grip. Because the moment we start restricting what people can vote for, we're no longer fully democratic. But if we allow people to vote away democracy, we lose it anyway. It's a trap. Some call this the paradox of tolerance, made famous by philosopher Karl Popper. He argued that a tolerant society must be intolerant of intolerance, otherwise intolerance will destroy tolerance itself. So in the same spirit, must a democracy be undemocratic to protect democracy? Should there be unchangeable laws, rights that no vote can undo, limits that even the majority cannot cross? Most modern democracies say yes, they enshrine rights in constitutions, they build checks and balances, they protect courts and the press and minority voices. But even these defenses are not invincible, because ultimately democracy depends not just on laws, but on culture, on values, on belief. If enough people stop believing in democracy, no rulebook can save it. That's what makes the democratic paradox so terrifying. It's not an attack from outside. It's a rot from within. It's the system turning against itself, not by force but by choice. And so democracy becomes a constant balancing act. Too much control and it becomes authoritarian in disguise. Too little and it opens the door to those who would tear it down. And yet, we still believe in it. Because for all its contradictions, all its fragility, democracy is also a promise that power belongs to everyone, that change is possible, that no single person is above the many, and no many is above the dignity of the one. So maybe the answer isn't in solving the paradox, maybe it's in understanding it, in teaching it, in remembering that democracy isn't just about ballots, it's about responsibility, that voting is not just a right but a duty, that freedom is not something handed to us but something we have to guard every day. Because in the end, democracy is not a building. It's not a flag. It's not even a government. It's a conversation between freedom and fairness, between choice and consequence, between the individual and the whole. And as long as we keep that conversation honest, alive, and open, the paradox stays in tension, not in collapse. But the moment we forget, the moment we vote not with hope but with fear, the moment we silence each other in the name of winning, that's when democracy forgets itself, and that's when the paradox wins. Just war paradox. Imagine a village at the edge of a vast empire. For generations it has known peace, until one morning when smoke rises over the horizon. Soldiers arrive, flying foreign flags, they burn homes, they take what they want, and by nightfall the village lies in ruin. Those who survive whisper a single question: why? Across the sea in a distant capital, a king declares war. He calls it necessary. He calls it just. He says his people were threatened. He says it was self-defense. But the villagers, dead or displaced, don't hear that speech. All they see is destruction. This is where the just war paradox begins. Can there ever truly be such a thing as a just war? Can killing ever be moral if the cause is right? And even if the war begins with justice, can it stay just once the blood starts to spill? The paradox sits at the intersection of ethics and violence. It asks us to reconcile the impossible. How can we fight for peace? How can we protect life by taking life? For centuries, philosophers, theologians, and generals have tried to answer this. From St. Augustine to Thomas Aquinas to modern UN charters, the idea of just war theory was born, not to glorify war, but to limit it. It sets rules, conditions, lines that must not be crossed. A war must have a just cause to defend, not to conquer. It must be waged by legitimate authority, not outlaws or warlords. It must be a last resort when all peace efforts have failed. It must be fought with proportionality, no more force than needed. And most crucially, it must avoid harming civilians. On paper, it's noble, rational, moral. But then comes the paradox, because war is chaos. War doesn't read charters. Bombs don't check passports. Soldiers don't always follow the rules, sometimes because they can't, sometimes because they won't. Even in a war started with the purest intentions, atrocities can follow. Even the side claiming righteousness may commit horrors. And so the paradox tightens. If war is inherently brutal, messy, and uncontrollable, then even if it begins justly, is it ever truly just? Let's go deeper. Imagine you're a commander. Your enemy has built a weapons factory hidden inside a school. You know they're violating every law of war, but they're still a threat. Do you strike the factory, knowing children may die? Or do you hold back, risking your own people? You may choose the lesser evil. You may call it necessary. But is it just? Now imagine the reverse. You're a parent in that school. You don't care about who's right. You only care that your child is gone. And the flags over the aircraft that dropped the bomb? They mean nothing. Here's the painful truth. Justice is often decided by where you stand, Not just morally, but literally. To the soldier, it may be duty. To the politician, it may be strategy. To the family on the ground, it's just grief. That's what makes the just war paradox so impossible to untangle. It tries to inject morality into something that often strips people of it. It tries to humanize an act that is, by definition, inhumane. It tries to control something that lives in chaos. And yet, we need it. Because the only thing worse than a war with rules is a war without them. Just war theory may be imperfect, but it's a boundary, a line in the sand that says there must be limits, there must be accountability, there must be something better than total war. Because if we abandon the idea of just war, we risk accepting all war, and that is far more dangerous. So the paradox remains: we must condemn war, but we must also prepare for it. We must call it evil, but we must ask how to make it less evil when it becomes unavoidable. Perhaps, in the end, the true paradox is not just about war, but about us. That we are capable of both compassion and cruelty. That we long for peace, but carry the seeds of violence within us. That we are the only species to dream of justice, and still go to war in its name. The just war paradox doesn't give easy answers. It wasn't meant to. It exists to haunt us, to force us to think before we act. To remind us that no war, however justified, is ever clean or simple or without cost, and that the highest moral victory may not be defeating the enemy, but avoiding the war entirely.
If you're still awake at this part of the video, you're doing great. By now, you've journeyed through some of the most mind-bending paradoxes ever imagined. Perfect company to quietly drift off with as your thoughts slow down. If these paradoxes helped you relax or gave your mind a gentle puzzle to ponder before sleep, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps me keep creating these long, soothing journeys through strange ideas. And if you have a favorite paradox or want me to explore more in future videos, drop a comment anytime. But for now, let your mind rest, your breathing slow, and surrender to the peaceful unknown. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next paradox.